Imagine you've bought tickets to a concert for $100. On the night of the show, you come down with a cold. You feel tired and achy. You would rather stay in bed, but you don't want the money to go to waste, so you go anyway. This is the sunk cost fallacy in action. The sunk cost fallacy happens when people keep doing something because they've already invested time, money, or effort, even if continuing doesn't help. The money for the concert is already gone. It won't come back whether you go or not. But your brain sees the ticket as a reason to keep going, even when it no longer makes sense. This fallacy shows up in business, relationships, and personal goals. Say a company spends $1 million developing a new product. After a year, it becomes clear the market doesn't want it. Instead of stopping, the company pours in more money, hoping to make it work. They keep going because they've already spent so much. But that money is gone. The real question is whether spending more will lead to a better outcome. Often, it doesn't. Another example: someone studies law for 3 years. By the end, they realize they don't like the work. But they become a lawyer anyway because they've come this far. They let past effort decide future action. They ignore the fact that the next 30 years could be spent doing something they dislike. The sunk cost fallacy traps people because it mixes emotion with logic. We feel loss when we walk away from something we've put effort into. That loss feels worse than the benefits of making a smarter choice. To break the pattern, ask, what would I choose if I hadn't already spent this time or money? This resets your thinking. It puts the focus on the present and future, not the past. Only current and future costs and benefits should guide your decision. You can't recover sunk costs, but you can choose not to waste more. Schrödinger's cat is a thought experiment in quantum mechanics. It shows how strange and unclear things can get at very small scales. Imagine a cat locked inside a sealed box. Inside the box, there's a tiny bit of radioactive material, a Geiger counter, a vial of poison, and a hammer. If the material decays, the counter triggers the hammer, which breaks the vial and releases the poison. The cat dies. If the material doesn't decay, nothing happens and the cat stays alive. Radioactive decay is a quantum event. It's random and follows no set pattern. Until you observe it, it exists in a mixed state, both decayed and not decayed. In quantum terms, it's called a superposition. The system doesn't settle into one outcome until someone opens the box and looks. So, while the box is closed, the cat is not just alive or dead. It's both alive and dead at the same time, according to quantum theory. This doesn't mean the cat is literally half alive. It means that without measurement, the system stays in a state that includes both outcomes. Erwin Schrödinger came up with this idea in 1935. He didn't mean to say a cat can actually be alive and dead. He wanted to show how weird quantum rules sound when applied to everyday things. We don't see half-alive cats in the real world, but quantum particles can exist in superpositions. This thought experiment helps us see the gap between quantum physics and how things work on larger scales. No one sees superpositions in cats, dogs, or people, but we do see them in particles like electrons or photons. Think of flipping a coin. If you don't look at the result, it feels like it could still be both heads and tails. But in quantum mechanics, the coin actually is in both states until someone checks. Schrödinger's cat takes that idea to the extreme, using something familiar to explain something hard to see. Phantom limb syndrome happens when a person feels sensations in a body part that is no longer there. This usually affects people who have lost an arm or a leg. Even after the limb is gone, the person might still feel itching, pressure, warmth, or even pain where the limb used to be. These feelings are not imaginary. They come from the brain and nervous system. The brain has a map of the body. It knows where each body part is and how to feel and move it. When a limb is removed, the brain doesn't always update the map right away. It still thinks the limb exists. so it sends and receives signals as if the limb were still there. These signals can feel very real. For example, someone who loses a foot might still feel their toes curl or cramp. A person who loses an arm might feel a sharp pain in the fingers. These feelings can be mild or severe. Some people get used to them. Others find them hard to live with. In some cases, the nerves in the stump send mixed signals to the brain. These signals can confuse the brain's map even more. The brain might try to make sense of them by creating the feeling of a limb. If the signals are strong or strange, the feeling might become painful. Doctors don't fully understand why phantom limb syndrome happens in every case, but they know the brain plays a big part. Some treatments aim to retrain the brain. One method is neurotherapy. A person uses a mirror to reflect the image of their remaining limb. When they move it, the brain sees two limbs and updates the map. Over time, this can reduce pain or strange sensations. Painkillers, nerve blocks, and physical therapy may also help. No single treatment works for everyone, but most people find some relief over time. A soldier loses his leg in combat. Months later, he wakes up feeling like his foot is on fire. But the leg is gone. His brain hasn't caught up. It still believes the leg is there. That's phantom limb syndrome. Loss aversion is the idea that people feel the pain of losing something more than they feel the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Losing $50 feels worse than gaining $50 feels good. This isn't just a small difference. Research shows that the pain of a loss can be twice as strong as the joy of a gain. This shows up in daily decisions. Imagine someone offers you a coin flip. Heads, you win $100. Tails, you lose $100. Most people turn it down. Now change the terms. Heads, you win $150. Tails, you lose $100. Even though the odds favor you, many people still hesitate. That's loss aversion. The risk of losing outweighs the possible reward. It's common in investing. A person buys a stock. The price drops. They don't sell, even when it's clear the company is in trouble. They wait, hoping it will bounce back. Selling would mean locking in a loss, so they hold on, even if it costs more later. Same person might sell a stock that goes up too fast, just to take the win, even if it has room to grow. The fear of future loss beats the chance of more gain. Loss aversion also shapes how we view choices. Say a doctor presents two surgeries. One has a 90% survival rate. The other has a 10% death rate. Both mean the same thing, but most people pick the first one. The word loss triggers fear, even when the facts don't change. It affects how companies present options. A gym might say, "Don't lose your progress, keep your membership." That hits harder than "keep improving your fitness." Framing something as a loss feels more urgent. A parent might promise a child ice cream for good behavior. That works. But if they say, "No ice cream if you misbehave," it works even better. The child focuses on what they'll lose, not what they might gain. That's loss aversion at work. Twin Earth is a thought experiment in philosophy of language and mind. It was introduced by Hilary Putnam in 1975. It shows how meaning depends not just on what's in your head, but also on the world around you. Imagine a planet exactly like Earth in every way. It has the same people, buildings, trees, and weather. Everyone speaks English. Everything is the same, except for one thing. On Twin Earth, what looks and tastes like water isn't H2O. It's a different liquid called XYZ. It acts like water. People drink it, cook with it, and swim in it. It's safe and clear, but its chemical makeup is not H2O. Now imagine a person on Earth says, "I want a glass of water." They mean H2O. A person on Twin Earth says the same thing, but they mean XYZ. The words sound the same, their thoughts feel the same, but the meaning is different because the substance in the world is different. This shows that meaning isn't only in the mind. It also comes from what things are made of and how they exist in the world. You can't always tell what someone means just by looking at their thoughts. You need to look at their surroundings too. Say you have a twin on Twin Earth. You both grew up the same way, in the same kind of town, with the same habits. When you each say water, your minds might feel identical, but you're referring to two different things, H2O on Earth and XYZ on Twin Earth. That difference matters. This thought experiment pushes against the idea that meaning comes only from what a person thinks. It shows that the environment plays a role. The word water doesn't just mean what's in your mind. It also points to what's out there in the world. So meaning isn't just mental, it's partly social and physical too. Twin Earth helps explain why what we mean depends on more than just how we think. Synesthesia happens when senses blend together in unusual ways. A person might hear a sound and see a color at the same time. Another might read a number and feel a texture. These experiences are automatic. They're not made up or imagined. They happen without effort and they stay consistent over time. One well-known type is grapheme color synesthesia. This is when someone sees letters or numbers in color. For example, the letter M might always look blue, while 2 always appears yellow. These colors don't change from day to day. Another type is sound color synesthesia. A person might hear a dog bark and see flashes of green. It doesn't matter where the sound comes from. It always brings the same color. Synesthesia often begins in childhood. A child might grow up thinking everyone sees Wednesday as orange or hears chocolate as a soft hum. It usually takes time before they realize others don't have the same sensory links. These connections don't fade or shift much with age. Some people with synesthesia use it in creative work. A musician might connect notes to colors and use that to write songs. A poet might taste certain words and choose them based on flavor. This doesn't mean they're more gifted. It just means their brain uses information in a different way. The brain of a person with synesthesia works a bit like a shortcut. Instead of keeping senses in separate areas, it connects them. When one sense activates, another one lights up too. Brain scans show this crossover in action. Researchers can often test for synesthesia by checking how stable the pairings are. If someone always links the same color with the same sound, that suggests it's real. Synesthesia isn't common, but it's not extremely rare either. Around 1 in every few thousand people may have it. Many live with it without knowing they just think it's normal until they ask others and realize their senses don't work the same way. Self-serving bias is a mental shortcut people use to protect their self-esteem. It happens when someone blames outside forces for failure but takes full credit for success. This way of thinking helps people feel better about themselves even when things go wrong. Picture a student who gets an A on a test. They say it's because they studied hard and are smart, but if they get a D, they blame the teacher or say the test was unfair. Nothing about how much they studied changes, but the reason for the grade does. In their mind, success comes from effort, and failure comes from something out of their control. This bias shows up at work too. A salesperson who hits a target says it's because they're skilled. If they miss it, they say the market was slow or the leads were bad. In sports, an athlete may say they won because of training, but lost because the ref made bad calls. In each case, the person shifts blame to avoid feeling at fault. Self-serving bias doesn't always happen on purpose. Most people aren't lying. They believe what they're saying. The brain naturally looks for ways to protect the self. It's easier to feel in control when success is yours and failure belongs to something else. This kind of thinking can make it hard to learn from mistakes. If someone always blames others, they miss chances to improve. For example, if a manager ignores problems in their leadership and blames the team instead, nothing changes. The team stays frustrated, and the same issues keep coming up. Researchers study this bias by giving people tasks and then asking them to explain their results. Time after time, people credit themselves when things go well and point fingers when things go badly. It doesn't matter if the task was random or skill-based, the pattern stays the same. Self-serving bias helps people protect their ego, but it can get in the way of honest self-reflection. When people always defend themselves, they stop seeing what they need to change. Emotional contagion happens when people catch emotions from others. It's not about acting or pretending. The brain picks up signals and mirrors the feelings around it. This can happen through facial expressions, tone of voice, or even body language. Imagine walking into a room where everyone is tense. You weren't upset before, but soon your shoulders tighten and your mood shifts. Nothing was said, but the feeling spreads. The same thing happens with joy. If people around you are laughing and relaxed, you start to feel lighter without trying. This process begins with something called mirror neurons. These are brain cells that respond when we see someone else show emotion. If someone frowns, your brain prepares you to frown too. If someone smiles, you start to feel a little better. The brain doesn't wait for you to decide, it reacts on its own. In close groups, emotional contagion moves fast. A stressed manager can pass that tension to the whole team. One anxious person in a meeting can shift the mood for everyone. On the other hand, a calm person can help steady others, even without saying much. It happens in families too. Children often pick up their parents' moods without knowing why. A parent who stays frustrated for long stretches may see their child start acting out. The child doesn't always understand the cause, but they react to what they feel in the room. Social media can also carry emotional contagion. Reading a long thread of angry posts can raise your heart rate, even if nothing in your life changed. The brain responds as if it's in the same room with those emotions. Researchers test this by measuring how people feel before and after exposure to certain moods. In controlled settings, when one person acts sad or happy, others tend to shift their emotions to match. The response is quick and often unconscious. It doesn't take a full conversation. Just eye contact or a sigh can trigger a reaction. Emotional contagion plays a quiet but steady role in how people connect and respond in everyday life. Overchoice happens when having too many options makes it harder to decide. It sounds like a good problem. More choices should mean more freedom, but in practice, it often leads to stress, delay, or regret. The brain has a limited amount of energy for making decisions. When every small choice demands attention, it drains that energy fast. Picture someone standing in a grocery store aisle, looking at 30 types of peanut butter. They stop, scan the labels, compare prices, think about ingredients. After 10 minutes, they either grab something at random or walk away without buying anything. The number of choices made the decision harder, not easier. This effect shows up in daily life. Picking an outfit from a full closet, scrolling through streaming shows, or even deciding which app to use for food delivery, all require decisions. Each one uses up a bit of mental effort. As the day goes on, the brain tires out. This is decision fatigue. It doesn't feel dramatic. It can show up as impatience, avoiding choices, or picking something just to get it over with. Overchoice affects big and small decisions. People shopping for a car, for example, might spend hours comparing features. They may end up feeling unsure even after buying one. The more time spent weighing options, the less satisfied they often feel. The same thing can happen with choosing schools, phones, or even what to do on the weekend. Some people try to limit their daily choices to save energy for bigger tasks. They eat the same breakfast, wear similar clothes, or set routines. This helps keep decision fatigue low. Businesses do this too by offering fewer plans or bundling services so customers don't feel overwhelmed. Researchers tested overchoice by offering people different numbers of options. When given 6 kinds of jam, shoppers were more likely to pick one and enjoy it. When shown 24, they hesitated and often bought nothing. More choice seemed better at first, but led to less action and lower satisfaction. Overchoice turns freedom into friction. making easy decisions feel like hard work. Déjà vu is the feeling that you've seen or experienced something before, even though you haven't. It comes without warning and fades quickly. Most people have felt it at least once. You might walk into a room and feel like you've been there before. Nothing is familiar, but the moment feels known. This happens when the brain sends a false signal of recognition. The feeling is strong, but there's no memory to back it up. Scientists believe it's a glitch in how the brain processes information. The brain may mistake the present for the past because of a small delay or mix-up between systems that handle memory and perception. Picture someone visiting a new town. They turn a corner and feel sure they've seen the street before. They haven't, but their brain reacts as if it's recalling a memory. The details, light, shapes, layout, might match something from a dream or a forgotten place. The brain connects it to something close but not exact, and the feeling of déjà vu follows. Another theory says déjà vu may happen when the brain processes the same information twice, once quickly and once with a short lag. The second pass feels like recognition, even though it's just a repeat of the present moment. It's like hearing an echo that tricks you into thinking it's a memory. Déjà vu is common in people with healthy brains, especially in younger adults. It doesn't point to a problem by itself. However, it can also occur in some types of epilepsy, often just before a seizure. In those cases, it comes from electrical activity in the brain's temporal lobe, where memory lives. You don't need to remember the past event for déjà vu to occur. In fact, most people never find the source of the feeling. It doesn't last long, and it doesn't usually repeat in the same situation. It's just a flash, a false signal that feels real. That's why it's so unsettling. Everything seems normal, yet the brain insists it's all happened before. Ambiguous figures are images that can be seen in more than one way. The brain flips between two possible views, but it can't see both at the same time. One common example is Rubin's vase. Some people see a vase in the center. Others see two faces in profile looking at each other. Both views are correct, but the brain picks just one at a time. This happens because of how the brain processes visual input. It looks for patterns and shapes based on contrast, edges, and back. In Rubin's vase, the black and white areas have equal weight. The brain doesn't know right away which part is the figure and which is the background. It guesses, and that guess changes back and forth. Ambiguous figures show how perception depends on context. What you see isn't just about what's on the page. It's also about how the brain decides to organize it. Another example is the duck-rabbit image. You can see a duck facing left or a rabbit facing right, but not both at once. The brain holds on to one interpretation until something causes it to switch. These images help psychologists study perception and attention. They show that seeing isn't just a simple process of collecting data. The brain fills in gaps, makes choices, and builds a picture from limited input. Even when the image doesn't change, the brain does. People don't all flip between views at the same speed. Some see both versions right away. Others stay stuck on one for a while. Factors like focus, past experience, and even mood can affect how fast the switch happens. With Rubin's vase, someone used to looking at faces may see the profiles first. Someone focused on objects might see the vase. In a classroom or lab, ambiguous figures test how flexible perception can be. They reveal the brain's role in shaping what seems obvious. The image stays the same, but the experience shifts. It's a quiet reminder that what we see often depends on how we look, not just what's there. The just world hypothesis is the belief that people get what they deserve. Good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. This way of thinking makes the world feel fair and orderly. It gives people a sense of control, even when events are random or unfair. Imagine hearing about someone who lost their job. A person with a strong belief in a just world might think they must not have worked hard enough, even if they don't know the full story. The idea is that the person caused their own problems. This protects the listener from feeling vulnerable. If bad things only happen to people who deserve them, then staying good should keep them safe. This belief can also shape how people view success. Someone who gets a promotion is often seen as more deserving, even if luck or timing played a big role. People assume their success came from effort or talent alone. This helps maintain the idea that the system is fair, even when it isn't. The just world hypothesis can lead to victim blaming. When someone is harmed, others may search for reasons that make the victim responsible. For example, if a person is robbed, people might ask why they were walking alone or what they were wearing. These questions shift focus from the wrong done to the actions of the victim. It's a way to explain the event without admitting that bad things can happen to anyone. Researchers study this bias by watching how people respond to stories about others. When a story ends with someone suffering, people often change their view of the person. They start to believe the person must have done something to deserve it. This shift happens more when the observer can't help or change the outcome. The just world hypothesis helps people feel safe, but it doesn't always reflect how the world works. It simplifies cause and effect to avoid discomfort. People want to believe the world is fair, so they often reshape facts to make them fit that belief, even when the truth is more complex. Social desirability bias happens when people give answers they think others will approve of, instead of being honest. It shows up most in surveys, interviews, or public settings. People want to look good, avoid judgment, or fit in. So they say what sounds right, not what they truly believe or do. Picture someone filling out a health survey. They check that they eat vegetables every day, exercise often, and never drink soda. But in reality, they skip meals, sit most of the day, and drink soda a few times a week. They don't mean to lie, they just want to appear healthy and responsible. This bias affects research, especially in studies about behavior, beliefs, or habits. If people give answers that sound better than the truth, the data becomes less reliable. For example, in a study about recycling, many might say they always sort their trash, even if they don't. The researcher ends up with results that don't match real actions. Social desirability bias also shows up in job interviews. A person might say they work well under pressure or never miss deadlines. These answers are common because they sound positive. The goal shifts from truth to impression. Even small questions can bring this out. If asked, "Do you always help your coworkers?" most people will say yes, even if that's not true every time. Culture plays a role too. In some places, group harmony matters more than individual opinion. People may avoid saying anything that could cause tension or seem selfish. In other settings, strong opinions may be more accepted, so the bias might be weaker. Researchers try to limit this bias in different ways. They may keep surveys anonymous or use indirect questions. Instead of asking, "Do you lie?" they might ask, "How common is lying among people like you?" This gives room for honesty without direct blame. Social desirability bias doesn't mean someone is trying to deceive. It means they're adjusting to fit what they think others want to hear. The need to be liked or accepted can shape answers more than the facts themselves. Hilbert's hotel is a thought experiment about infinity. It shows how strange and different infinite sets can be from regular numbers. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all numbered 1, 2, 3, and so on. Every room is full. There are no vacancies. Still, the hotel can make room for more guests. Suppose one new guest arrives. The manager moves the guest in room 1 to room 2, the guest in room 2 to room 3, and so on. Every guest shifts to the next room. Now room 1 is empty, and the new guest has a place to stay. No one leaves. Every guest still has a room, and the hotel is still full. Now, imagine a bus shows up with an infinite number of new guests. The manager moves the current guest in room 1 to room 2, the one in room 2 to room 4, the one in room 3 to room 6, and so on. Each guest goes to a room with a number twice their original one. This move opens all the odd-numbered rooms. That creates infinite space for the new guests. The manager puts the new arrivals in rooms 1, 3, 5, and so on. The idea seems impossible, but it makes sense in terms of math. This hotel helps show how infinity doesn't follow normal rules. With regular hotels, a full hotel means no more guests can stay. But an infinite hotel can always add more. Even after filling up, it can still find space for more people by using a new pattern. Hilbert's hotel also works with even stranger ideas. Suppose an infinite number of buses arrive, each with an infinite number of guests. The manager can still find space by using a method based on prime numbers. It gets complex, but the core idea stays the same. There's always room, no matter how many show up. Mathematicians use this scenario to explain properties of infinite sets. It shows that adding or moving things around in infinity doesn't work the same way it does with finite numbers. The hotel isn't real, but the math behind it is solid. The planning fallacy is the tendency to underestimate how much time a task will take, even when you've done it before. People often think they'll finish faster than they do. They ignore delays, mistakes, and changes that usually come up. This makes plans too tight and deadlines too short. Imagine a student starting a paper. They think they can finish it in 2 days, so they wait until the last minute. But writing takes longer than expected. Sources are hard to find. The first draft needs more editing than they thought. They end up working all night or turning it in late. This keeps happening, even if they've made the same mistake before. The planning fallacy isn't just about schoolwork. It affects projects at work, home repairs, travel plans, and even government budgets. A team might plan to launch a product in 6 months. They forget to factor in design changes, staff turnover, or tech problems. The launch gets pushed back, costs go up, and the team is surprised even though similar delays happened on past projects. This happens because people focus too much on the best-case scenario. They picture things going smoothly and ignore past problems. Psychologists call this optimism bias. People trust their plan more than they trust their experience. Even experts fall into this trap. One way to reduce the planning fallacy is to use past data. If a report usually takes 10 days, plan for 10 days, not the 5 you hope it will take. This is called reference class forecasting. It means looking at how long similar tasks took, instead of guessing from scratch. Teams sometimes add buffer time to their schedule, but that only helps if the extra time is realistic. If the whole plan is based on hope instead of history, even the buffer won't help. People also tend to hide delays once they fall behind, which only makes things worse. The planning fallacy is common because it feels good to be confident. But careful planning means expecting delays and being honest about how long things really take. Overconfidence is when someone feels more sure about their knowledge, skills, or predictions than the facts support. It's a common bias. People tend to overestimate what they know, how well they can do something, or how accurate their guesses are. This can lead to mistakes, especially when decisions involve risk or uncertainty. A student might take a test without studying much because they feel ready, but their score ends up lower than expected. They weren't trying to fool anyone. They truly believed they understood the material. The gap between what they thought and what was true is a sign of overconfidence. In the workplace, a manager might set a deadline without consulting the team. They believe the project will go smoothly, but setbacks happen and the deadline gets missed. The manager thought their plan was solid, but they didn't account for real-world delays. Again, confidence outpaced accuracy. Investing is full of overconfidence. A person might believe they can pick winning stocks better than most, even with little experience. They feel certain their choices will succeed. But markets are complex, and results often don't match their confidence. Research shows that people who trade more often, believing they know what they're doing, tend to earn less over time. Even experts fall into this trap. Doctors, engineers, or analysts sometimes give narrow predictions, saying they're 95% sure of an outcome. But when tested, they turn out to be right far less often. The confidence level is higher than the actual hit rate. Overconfidence isn't just about skill. It also affects memory and judgment. Someone might swear they remember a detail from a meeting, but be wrong, or they might argue a point with certainty, even if they lack full information. The problem isn't dishonesty. It's that they don't realize their limits. This bias is hard to spot in the moment. The more confident a person feels, the less likely they are to question themselves. That's why overconfidence can cause problems, even when intentions are good and the goal is clear. Every human eye has a blind spot. This is a small area in the field of vision where you can't see anything. It's caused by the optic nerve. The nerve connects the eye to the brain and passes through the retina at one spot. That spot has no light-sensitive cells, so it can't detect images. You don't notice this gap in daily life because the brain fills it in. It uses information from the other eye and the surrounding area to guess what should be. The guess is usually good enough that you don't feel like anything is missing. You can test the blind spot yourself with a simple trick. Close your left eye and focus your right eye on an X drawn on a piece of paper. Place a dot a few inches to the right of the X. Slowly move the paper toward your face while keeping your right eye on the X. At a certain point, the dot will disappear. That's when it falls in the blind spot. The blind spot is on the outer side of each eye's field of vision. In most people, it's about 15 degrees away from the center. Each eye has one, but because they're in different places, they don't usually overlap. The brain blends the two views to give a full picture. The size of the blind spot doesn't change, but its effects can depend on the situation. If one eye is closed or blocked, the missing area might become more noticeable. Still, most people never notice their blind spot unless they're looking for it. Doctors study the blind spot during eye exams to check for problems with the optic nerve. If the blind spot grows or changes, it can signal damage or disease, such as glaucoma. In design, understanding the blind spot helps avoid placing important information in areas people might miss. For example, car mirrors and safety systems take it into account to prevent accidents. Even though it's a natural part of vision, the blind spot shows how much the brain does to create a complete image from limited data. Circular reasoning is a logical fallacy where the conclusion simply repeats the starting point. Instead of offering real proof, the argument just restates the claim in a different way. It creates the illusion of reasoning, but it doesn't move the thought forward. Take this example. This book is popular because everyone likes it. If you ask why everyone likes it, the answer might be because it's popular. The reasoning loops back to the beginning. There's no outside support, just a circle of statements that rely on each other. Another example is in debates about rules. Someone might say, "The law is just because it's the law." That doesn't explain why the law is fair or right. It assumes what it needs to prove. The speaker treats the law's existence as evidence of its justice, which skips over the real question. This kind of reasoning can be hard to spot because it often sounds smooth. People may not notice that nothing new is being added. The argument feels complete, but it doesn't give a reason you can check or test. Circular reasoning shows up in many places: politics, advertising, even casual conversation. A parent might say, "You can't go out because I said so." When asked why their word is final, they might reply, "Because I'm the parent." The authority is assumed rather than explained. Writers and speakers sometimes fall into this trap when they feel pressure to defend a belief but don't have strong evidence. Instead of admitting the gap, they return to their original claim. It keeps the argument going without offering support. In logic and debate, circular reasoning weakens an argument. It shows that the person hasn't built a case from the ground up. They've just put the same idea in a different. Clear reasoning needs evidence that stands apart from the claim. Otherwise, it becomes a loop, closed, neat, but empty. A Boltzmann brain is a thought experiment in physics and philosophy. It comes from ideas about entropy, which is the measure of disorder in a system. Over time, the universe tends toward more disorder. But in rare cases, random particles can briefly form ordered structures by chance. Physicist Ludwig Boltzmann suggested that our universe might have come from one of these rare, random events. Later thinkers took that idea further. They asked, if particles can randomly form a universe, what's to stop them from forming just a single brain, complete with thoughts and memories, floating in space? This leads to the concept of the Boltzmann brain. It's a brain that forms by chance from random particles. It lasts only a short time, but has a full set of false memories. From its point of view, it might think it lived a whole life, saw a sky, had a body, and talked to people. But in reality, none of that happened. It only imagined it. The problem comes from math. In a universe where everything happens by chance, it's far more likely for a single brain to form than for a full universe to appear. Making a whole galaxy or planet is much harder than forming one small mind. If that's true, then most conscious beings in the universe should be Boltzmann brains, not humans like us. This idea creates a conflict. We trust our memories and senses to show us the world, but if we're just random brains with fake memories, then we can't trust what we know. That makes science, reason, and even everyday thinking unreliable. Physicists don't believe Boltzmann brains actually exist. Instead, they use the idea to test theories about the universe. A good theory shouldn't predict that most observers are random, short-lived brains. If it does, the theory may need to change. In this way, the Boltzmann brain helps scientists check whether their models of the universe make sense, even at the extreme edge of logic. The bystander effect is when people are less likely to help someone in need if others are around. The more people there are, the less each person feels responsible. Everyone assumes someone else will act, so no one does. Picture a person collapsing on a busy sidewalk. Dozens of people walk by, but no one steps forward. Each one sees others nearby and thinks someone else will help. But that same thought keeps everyone frozen. If the same thing happened on a quiet street with only one witness, that person would likely step in right away. Psychologists first studied the bystander effect after a case in 1964, when a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked in New York City. Reports said many people heard or saw parts of the attack, but didn't call the police. The story led researchers to ask why people sometimes fail to act in emergencies. One key factor is diffusion of responsibility. When a group is present, each person feels less pressure to do something. They believe others will take care of it. Another factor is social influence. People look to others to decide how to react. If no one else seems alarmed, they assume the situation isn't serious. This effect doesn't only happen in extreme cases. It shows up in small ways too. A dropped wallet in a busy mall may sit untouched longer than one dropped in a quiet shop. In meetings, someone might avoid speaking up about a mistake, expecting someone else to point it out. Studies have tested the bystander effect in labs and public settings. In one classic experiment, researchers placed a person in a room where they heard someone in distress. When alone, the person helped most of the time. When others were present, even actors pretending to ignore it, help dropped sharply. The bystander effect doesn't mean people don't. It means group settings can confuse the sense of duty. When people realize this bias exists, they're more likely to step up. Once one person acts, others often follow. The key is breaking the freeze by becoming the first to respond. False memories are memories of events that didn't happen or didn't happen the way someone remembers. They feel real and clear, just like true memories. A person may strongly believe the details are accurate, even when evidence shows they are wrong. One example is someone remembering being at a family event that they never attended. They might recall who was there, what they wore, and even what they ate. Late, when a family member points out that the person was out of town that day, the memory still feels true. It's not a lie. The brain has filled in a gap without meaning to. False memories can form in different ways. Sometimes they start with a suggestion. If someone asks, "Do you remember the time you got lost in the mall as a child?" the person may picture it, even if it never happened. Over time, that picture can grow into a full memory. The more often they recall it, the more real it seems. Group settings can also shape memories. People often remember stories together and fill in missing parts as they talk. If one person adds a wrong detail, others may accept it. They adjust their own memory to match the group. This happens even with strong emotional events like accidents or major news stories. Researchers study false memories using word lists. They show people a list of related words like bed, rest, tired, dream, but leave out the word sleep. Later, many people say sleep was on the list. Their brain made a link and filled it in. Memory doesn't work like a video recorder. It's rebuilt each time you recall it. Small errors can slip in and grow with time. Stress, leading questions, or repeated retelling all increase the chance of false memories. This has real effects in courtrooms, therapy, and daily life. Eyewitnesses may give detailed but incorrect statements. A person in therapy may recall events that never occurred. These memories feel honest, which makes them powerful, but not always accurate. Recognizing how memory works helps people stay aware of its limits. The framing effect happens when the way information is presented changes how people make decisions. The same facts can lead to different choices depending on how they are worded. People respond more to how something sounds than to what it really means. Take this example. A doctor tells a patient that a surgery has a 90% survival rate. The patient feels hopeful and agrees to it. But if the doctor says there's a 10% chance of dying, the patient may hesitate. Both statements are true. They just focus on different sides of the same outcome. The frame changes the reaction. This effect plays a big role in health, money, and risk. A food label that says 90% fat-free sounds better than one that says contains 10% fat. The product hasn't changed, but the label makes it seem healthier. In marketing, companies often frame deals in positive terms to make them more appealing. In studies, researchers gave people a choice between two medical treatments. One would save 200 lives for sure. The other had a chance to save more lives, but also a chance to save none. When framed as lives saved, people picked the sure option. When the same options were framed in terms of lives lost, they took more risks. Losses felt worse than gains, even with the same numbers. The framing effect also shows up in everyday language. A policy described as helping the poor may get more support than one described as raising taxes, even if both describe the same plan. People react to the label, not just the details. This bias works because people use mental shortcuts. They don't break down every number or fact. Instead, they go with what feels right. Words shape that feeling. The frame sets the tone and pushes thinking in a certain direction. Being aware of the framing effect helps people think more clearly. It reminds them to look past the wording and ask what the facts mean, not just how they sound. Free will is the idea that people can make choices on their own without being forced by outside causes. It feels natural. You choose what to eat, where to go, and what to say. No one makes those choices for you. But when you look deeper, the question becomes more complex. Some scientists and philosophers argue that every choice you make comes from causes you don't control. Your brain reacts to genetics, past experiences, habits, and the environment. When you pick a drink from a menu, it feels like a free choice. But maybe your brain is leaning on memories, advertising, or a past craving. If all your decisions come from those factors, can you still call them free? A famous study showed that the brain starts to prepare for a decision before the person becomes aware of it. In the lab, people were asked to press a button when they felt like it. Brain scans showed activity building up before they said they made the choice. This made some scientists question whether the conscious mind truly controls decisions or just notices them after the fact. Others say free will still matters, even if outside forces shape choices. You may not control every influence, but you still weigh options, reflect, and make decisions based on goals and values. That's enough, they argue, to call it free will in a practical sense. The law, for example, assumes people have free will. It holds people responsible for their actions. If someone commits a crime, the court doesn't just ask what caused it. It asks if the person chose to do it. Without that idea, the system wouldn't work the same way. There's also the view that free will and outside causes can coexist. This is called compatibilism. It says your actions can have causes, but you still act freely if no one forces you. You drive a car on a road with turns and rules. You don't control the road, but you steer the car. That's still a kind of freedom. ... Empathy gaps happen when people struggle to understand how others feel in a different emotional or physical state. This bias also works in reverse. People in one state can't imagine how they themselves might think or act in another. It shows up in daily life and affects how we judge others, make decisions, and offer support. Take hunger as an example. A person who just ate a full meal may not grasp how hard it is to think clearly while hungry. They might say, just focus, or it's not that bad, because they can't feel what the other person feels. The same gap appears with pain, fear, anger, or stress. When we're calm, we underestimate how strong those emotions can be. When we're in the grip of them, we forget what calm feels like. In relationships, this can cause real problems. If one partner feels anxious or upset, the other might dismiss it as overreaction because they're not feeling the same thing. At work, a manager who feels confident may not understand why a team member feels nervous about a new task. They assume the person is being weak or slow, when really, they're just seeing the task from a different state of mind. This bias also affects choices. Someone trying to quit smoking might say, "I'll be fine around other smokers." Later, when the craving hits, they feel overwhelmed and give in. They didn't plan for how strong the craving would feel because they made the plan while calm. Their past self couldn't connect with how their future self would think in a different state. Empathy gaps can also affect policy and care. A person making rules for welfare or healthcare may not fully grasp what it's like to live with chronic stress, illness, or poverty if they've never experienced it. Their decisions may seem fair from their point of view, but miss the needs of the people affected. Recognizing empathy gaps can help people pause before judging or planning. It reminds them that feelings shift, and those shifts change how people think, act, and understand the world. The trolley problem is a thought experiment in ethics. It asks whether you should take an action that harms one person to save more lives. It's used to explore how people make moral choices when every option causes harm. In the basic version, a trolley is moving down a track toward 5 people who can't move. You're standing next to a lever. If you pull it, the trolley will switch to another track where only one person stands. You have 2 options. Do nothing and let 5 people die, or pull the lever and cause one person's death to save 5. There's no way to stop the trolley or warn the people. This setup forces you to choose between two moral ideas. One is to reduce harm overall, save the most lives. That would mean pulling the lever. The other is to avoid causing harm directly, even if more people die as a result. That would mean doing nothing. A second version changes the choice. Now you're on a bridge above the tracks, and a trolley is again heading toward 5 people. A large person stands next to you. You can push them onto the track to stop the trolley. They will die, but the 5 will live. The outcome is the same. One dies to save 5, but most people say pushing the person is worse than pulling the lever. It feels more personal. The trolley problem helps people think about the role of action, intent, and personal involvement. It asks whether it's worse to harm someone by doing something or by letting something happen. It also raises questions about fairness. Is it right to decide whose life matters more? Philosophers, psychologists, and even engineers use the trolley problem. In self-driving car design, for example, programmers must decide how the car should respond in crash situations. These decisions echo the same logic: who gets protected and why. People don't always give the same answers, even when the facts don't change. That's what makes the trolley problem useful. It shows how feelings, values, and context shape moral choices, not just numbers or rules. The sunk cost fallacy happens when someone keeps investing time, money, or effort into something just because they've already put in a lot, even if it's no longer a good idea. Instead of looking at future value, they focus on past costs, which can't be recovered. This leads to poor decisions. Picture someone watching a long movie that turns out to be boring. They think, "I've already watched an hour, I might as well finish it." But the hour is gone. Staying won't get it back. The better choice is to stop and do something more enjoyable. Still, many people stay because of the time they already spent. It happens in work and personal life too. A business may keep funding a project that's failing. They've already spent millions, so they feel they can't walk away. But adding more money won't fix the loss. It may just make it worse. The smart move is to stop, cut the losses, and use the money elsewhere. That's hard when past investment feels like a reason to continue. The same fallacy shows up in relationships. Someone might stay in a long-term partnership that no longer works. They think, "We've been together 5 years. I can't give up now." But staying unhappy doesn't make the past time more valuable. It only adds more time to something that isn't working. This fallacy comes from a strong desire not to waste. People don't want to admit that their past effort or money is gone. They also want to avoid regret, which makes walking away feel like failure. But the key is to make decisions based on what will help now or in the future, not based on what's already been spent. Economists and psychologists study this fallacy in labs and real-world cases. The lesson is always the same. Sunk costs should not guide current choices. Only future benefits and risks matter. Once a cost is sunk, it's gone. Holding on only adds more loss. Letting go takes clarity, not more effort. Confirmation bias is the tendency to notice, remember, or believe information that supports what you already think, while ignoring or dismissing what goes against it. This bias affects how people gather facts, how they interpret evidence, and even how they recall past events. Imagine someone who believes a certain diet works best. They search for articles that praise it and avoid ones that question it. When they see someone lose weight on that diet, they see it as proof. When someone else doesn't get results, they call it a rare case. They filter what they see to match their belief. This happens in politics too. A person who supports one party tends to watch news that agrees with their views. They trust stories that make their side look good and doubt reports that don't. Even when shown the same facts, two people can come away with different opinions because of what they focus on. Confirmation bias can also affect memory. After a big decision, like buying a car, people remember the good reviews they read before buying and forget the bad ones. This helps them feel sure they made the right choice, even if the car later has problems. In the workplace, a manager may think a certain employee is lazy. After that, they might notice every missed deadline, but overlook the times that employee works late or helps a teammate. The manager's belief shapes what they see and how they judge it. This bias feels natural because it makes the world seem more stable. It's easier to handle new information when it fits what we already believe, but it can lead to blind spots and poor decisions. Researchers study confirmation bias using tests where people must choose between different types of evidence. Most people prefer information that confirms their views, even when neutral or opposing evidence would be more useful. Awareness is the first step to avoid it. Asking, "What would prove me wrong?" or "What evidence am I missing?" can help slow down the bias. The goal is not to doubt everything, but to stay open to the full picture, even when it challenges your beliefs. The simulation hypothesis is the idea that our world might be a computer simulation. It suggests that everything we see, feel, and experience could be part of a program run by advanced beings. This idea comes from questions in physics, philosophy, and computer science. One version of the argument goes like this: if future civilizations develop computers powerful enough, they could run detailed simulations of their past. These simulations would include people with thought, memories, and emotions, just like us. If that's possible, then there could be many more worlds, simulated worlds, than real ones. In that case, the odds that we live in the one real world are low. Philosopher Nick Bostrom made this argument popular. He said that at least one of the following must be true. Advanced civilizations never reach the point where they can run these simulations. They reach that point, but choose not to run them, or they do run them, and we are likely in one of them. His point is not that we are definitely in a simulation, but that it can't be ruled out. People compare this to video games or virtual reality. In games, characters follow rules and react to their environment. As technology improves, those worlds look and feel more real. The idea is that with enough detail and power, a simulated world could become so advanced that the people inside wouldn't know they were in one. Some scientists point to parts of physics that seem digital or rule-based. For example, space and time may behave like a grid, not a smooth surface. Quantum particles also act in ways that look like calculations. These patterns make some wonder if the universe has a code-like structure. Critics argue that the hypothesis can't be tested. If you can't prove or disprove it, they say, it's not useful science. Others say it changes how we think about reality, even if it's never proven. If the world is a simulation, then everything, matter, thoughts, choices, runs on code. That raises questions about meaning, control, and what counts as real. A paradox of choice is the idea that having more options can make people feel worse, not better. At first, more choices seem like a good thing. You get more freedom, more control, and a better chance of finding what fits you. But when the number of options gets too high, it can lead to stress, doubt, and regret. Imagine walking into a store to buy jam. You see 24 flavors lined up on the shelf. At first, it feels exciting. But soon you start comparing ingredients, labels, and prices. You worry about picking the wrong one. After a few minutes, you walk away without buying any. Later, a smaller store with only 6 kinds of jam makes the decision easier. You pick one, feel good about it, and move on. This happens because too many options force people to do extra work. They have to weigh each choice, predict future outcomes, and give up all the other options once they decide. That creates what's called decision fatigue. The brain gets tired from too much comparing and second-guessing. Even after making a choice, people may feel less satisfied. They wonder if one of the other options would have been better. That's called regret, and it's stronger when more alternatives were on the table. A person who picks one sweater from 5 options might be happy. A person who picks from 50 might keep thinking they missed a better one. Psychologist Barry Schwartz studied this and found that while some choice is helpful, too much can overwhelm. In areas like shopping, dating, or career planning, people can freeze up or feel less confident, even when the outcome is good. They blame themselves for not choosing perfectly. Some people try to avoid this by sticking to a few trusted brands or setting simple rules, like always ordering the same meal. This may seem boring, but it cuts stress and saves time. The paradox is that fewer choices can lead to more peace of mind. The right number of options helps people feel in control without drowning in decisions. The gambler's fallacy is the belief that past random events affect future ones, even when they don't. It shows up most in games of chance, like flipping a coin or spinning a roulette wheel. People think that if one outcome happens often, the opposite outcome must be due. This logic is false, but it feels true. Take a coin toss. Each flip has a 50% chance of landing heads and a 50% chance of tails. If someone sees heads come up 5 times in a row, they may believe tails is more likely next, but the odds stay the same. The coin has no memory. Each flip is separate from the last. In a casino, this fallacy often appears at roulette tables. If red shows up 10 times in a row, some players bet big on black. They think the wheel must even out, but the wheel doesn't know the past. The next spin still has the same chance of landing on red or black, depending on the layout. This mistake comes from a misunderstanding of how probability works. People expect patterns to balance out in the short term. That belief clashes with how randomness behaves. Over a long series of events, results may even out, but in the short term, streaks and clusters are common. The gambler's fallacy also appears outside of gambling. In sports, a fan might think a basketball player is due for a shot after missing several. In reality, each shot depends on the player's skill, position, and pressure, not just what happened before. This bias can lead to poor decisions, especially when money is involved. People keep betting because they think their luck must turn around. They double down after losses, hoping to catch the win they believe is coming. This often leads to even bigger losses. Researchers have tested this in labs. Participants shown random patterns still try to find meaning or trends. The brain looks for order even where none exists. That's the root of the gambler's fallacy, a strong but wrong sense that chance has rules and memory when it doesn't. The Mandela effect is when many people share the same false memory. They believe something happened a certain way, even though records show it didn't. The name comes from a common belief that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. In fact, he was released in 1990 and became president of South Africa in 1994. Still, some people clearly remember watching news about his death years earlier. One well-known example involves a children's book series. Many remember it as the Berenstain Bears, spelled with an EI. But the real name is the Berenstain Bears, with an AI. People say that spelling looks wrong and feels off, as if the name somehow changed over time. Another case is a line from the movie Star Wars. Many fans remember Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father." The actual line is, "No, I am your father," even after hearing the correct version. People often feel sure they heard it the other way. These shared mistakes usually come from how memory works. The brain doesn't store events like a video. It rebuilds memories each time we recall them, and during that process, small errors slip in. When people share the same cues, like movies, books, or headlines, they often build similar false memories. Social media and conversation help spread and reinforce those errors. Some explanations focus on the way the brain fills in blanks using logic or pattern. For example, the Stein ending is more common in names than Stein, so the brain might swap the letters without noticing. Once the false version feels familiar, people trust it more than the real one. The Mandela effect doesn't mean someone is lying or confused on purpose. It shows that memory can feel accurate even when it's wrong. This has real impact in areas like eyewitness reports or public debates, where people rely on memory to support what they believe is true. When many people remember the same false detail, it can feel like proof, even when the facts say otherwise. Dividing by zero is not allowed in math. It doesn't give a real answer, and trying to do it breaks the rules of arithmetic. Division means asking how many times one number fits into another. If you divide 10 by 2, the answer is 5 because 2 fits into 10 5 times. But 0 doesn't work this way. Now try 10 divided by 0. You're asking how many times does 0 fit into 10? The problem is that 0 times anything is always 0. There's no number you can multiply by 0 to get 10. No answer makes the equation true. That's why dividing by 0 is undefined. Some people think the answer should be infinity, since 0 is so small. But that idea causes problems. If you allow division by 0, then basic math laws stop working. You can get results that break logic, like saying 1 equals 2. In math, any rule that leads to contradictions must be avoided. That's why 0 stays off limits in division. You can also think of it with smaller numbers. Divide 4 by 2 and you get 2. That makes sense. 2 times 2 is 4. Try 4 divided by 1 and you get 4. 1 goes into 4 exactly 4 times. But if you try 4 divided by 0, there's no number that makes it work. 0 times anything is still 0, not 4. This rule matters in real life too. In computer programs, dividing by 0 can cause errors or crashes. Most systems block it to protect calculations. In science and engineering, equations with a 0 in the denominator often mean a point where the system breaks down or behaves unpredictably. Mathematicians have tried to define division by 0 in special ways, like using limits in calculus. In some cases, the value grows without bound, which is where the idea of infinity comes in. But even in advanced math, they treat it with care and don't call it regular division. Keeping division by 0 undefined keeps the rest of math working the way it should. It's a boundary that helps protect logic and consistency. Emotional paradoxes are moments when people feel two emotions at once, even if those feelings seem like opposites. One common example is bittersweetness, feeling happy and sad at the same time. This mix can happen during major life events, endings, or moments of change. The brain doesn't split feelings into clear boxes. It can hold both joy and sorrow in the same experience. Think of a parent watching their child leave for college. They feel proud, excited, and hope. At the same time, they feel sadness, loss, and maybe fear. Both reactions are real. One emotion doesn't cancel out the other. The situation creates space for both. Another example is finishing a long project. There may be relief and pride, but also a sense of emptiness. The goal that filled your time is gone. The result may be exactly what you hoped for, but it still leaves a quiet gap. These paradoxes are not flaws in thinking. They reflect the complexity of real life. Emotions respond to what something means, not just what happens. Saying goodbye to a friend can hurt, even if the goodbye is for a good reason. Watching an old video might bring joy and sadness at once. Joy for the memory, sadness for what's past. People sometimes try to choose one feeling and ignore the rest. They may say, "I should be happy," and push away any sadness. But doing that often makes the emotion strong. It's more helpful to notice both and let them sit side by side. Artists, writers, and musicians often work with emotional paradoxes. A song might make someone cry and still bring comfort. A photo might show both beauty and loss. These mixed feelings don't confuse the message, they make it deeper. Psychologists study these moments to understand how the mind handles complex events. Mixed emotions can slow down decisions or cause reflection, but they also show maturity. Feeling two ways at once means you're paying attention to all parts of the moment, not just the surface. It's a sign that your emotions are flexible, not fixed. Pascal's wager is a famous idea from philosopher Blaise Pascal. He argued that when it comes to belief in God, it's safer to believe than not to believe, even if you're unsure. The idea is not about proving God exists. It's about thinking in terms of risk and reward. Pascal said you can't know for certain if God is real, but you still have to choose how to live. If you believe in God and you're right, you gain everything, eternal life or salvation. If you're wrong, you lose very little. But if you don't believe and you're wrong, you lose everything. If you're right, you gain nothing. From that view, belief looks like the better bet. It's like placing a wager. You have limited information, but you must decide. The cost of belief is small compared to what you might gain. The cost of disbelief could be much greater if God does exist. Pascal thought that made belief the smart choice, even if the odds seem low. Critics have raised several problems with this argument. One issue is which God to believe in. Many religions exist, and they don't all describe God in the same way. Betting on one could mean ignoring others. Pascal's wager doesn't say how to choose between them. Another point is that belief isn't just a choice. People don't believe things because they want to win a reward. True belief usually comes from trust, evidence, or experience, not fear of punishment or hope for gain. Pretending to believe may not work if a God values honesty. Still, the wager has shaped debates about faith and reason. It moves the question away from proof and toward decision-making under uncertainty. It asks what you stand to gain or lose based on your choice. Some use similar logic in other areas. For example, with climate change, people argue it's safer to act as if it's real, even if doubt remains. If the cost of being wrong is high, the safer bet is to prepare. Pascal's wager uses that same kind of thinking applied to belief in God. Fractals are shapes or patterns that repeat at different scales. If you zoom in on one part, you see a smaller version of the whole. This self-similar structure keeps showing up no matter how close you look. Some fractals are exact and built by math. Others appear in nature with small changes. One of the most famous fractals is the Mandelbrot set. It's made using a simple formula, but the shape it creates is complex. When you zoom in, the edge keeps revealing new details that look like parts of the full shape. It never smooths out or ends. The same pattern keeps coming back, just in smaller and smaller forms. Fractals also appear in real life. You can see them in snowflakes, tree branches, coastlines, and clouds. A fern leaf is a good example. Each small leaflet looks like the full fern. Rivers and their smaller branches follow similar rules. These patterns don't need perfect math. They just follow the same kind of structure again and again. Fractals are useful in science and engineering. In computer graphics, artists use fractals to create natural-looking landscapes and textures. In medicine, researchers study fractal patterns in the body, like the branching of blood vessels or the structure of the lungs. In nature, fractals help things grow and spread in space-efficient ways. One key feature of fractals is their infinite detail. You can zoom in forever, and the shape keeps going. That's different from shapes like circles or squares, which have clear, simple edges. Fractals blur the line between simple rules and complex results. Mathematicians use formulas to build exact fractals. These formulas repeat steps over and over, a process called recursion. Each step builds on the last one. The shape grows by following the same rule again and again. The result looks chaotic, but it comes from order. Fractals challenge how we think about shapes, space, and size. They don't fit cleanly into flat or solid forms. They sit somewhere in between, with parts that fill space in unusual ways. They show how simple math can build complex worlds. Motion-induced blindness is a visual illusion where things in plain sight seem to disappear when something around them is moving. It shows how the brain can miss steady objects when focusing on motion. Even though the eyes still take in the same light, the brain filters out the still image. One common version of this illusion shows a few small dots on a screen with a background of moving shapes, like rotating blue crosses. If you stare at the center without moving your eyes, the dots fade away and then reappear. They don't blink or move, but your brain stops seeing them. Nothing on the screen changes, but your perception does. This happens because the brain handles motion and still images differently. When you focus on motion, the brain treats steady objects as less important. It assumes they are either not relevant or part of the background. Over time, it may stop showing them to your conscious awareness. The brain is always trying to simplify what it sees and often drops anything that seems unnecessary. This effect helps researchers understand how attention works. Vision is not just about what hits your eyes, it's about what your brain decides to keep. When something moves, it pulls more attention. Steady objects can get ignored, even if they're still there. Motion-induced blindness may explain some everyday experiences. Drivers, for example, might not notice a parked car or a pedestrian when focusing on moving traffic. Pilots have also reported missing stable warning lights during flight. In both cases, the brain may suppress still signals in favor of tracking movement. Scientists test this effect in labs to study how vision and attention interact. They change the speed of background motion or the size of the steady dots to see what affects visibility. These studies show that attention, not just sight, plays a big role in what we notice or ignore. The illusion doesn't mean your vision is broken. It shows how your brain balances different signals. It makes guesses about what matters most and sometimes hides things in plain view to keep up with motion. Period. Auditory hallucinations are sounds that a person hears but that aren't caused by anything outside the body. These sounds can seem real, but they come from the brain, not the environment. The most common type is hearing voices. Some people hear music, whispers, or random noises like knocks or clicks. The sounds may be clear or vague, calm or disturbing. This experience can happen in mental health conditions like schizophrenia, but it's not limited to that. People under extreme stress, grief, or lack of sleep may also hear things that aren't there. Some people hear a loved one's voice after they've passed away. Others may hear their name called when no one is around. These events are not always signs of illness, but they show how powerful and active the brain can be. In some cases, the voices seem to come from outside the head. In others, they sound more like thoughts, but still feel separate from the person's own thinking. For someone with schizophrenia, the voices might speak clearly and comment on what the person is doing, or even give commands. These voices can be upsetting, especially if they say negative or threatening things. Doctors and researchers believe that auditory hallucinations come from changes in brain activity. Areas involved in hearing and language may become active without any sound entering the ear. The brain treats its own signals as if they came from outside. This mix-up can make a thought or memory feel like a real voice. Treatment depends on the cause. For people with a mental health condition, doctors may use medication or therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help the person respond to the voices in a way that reduces stress. In other cases, better sleep, stress reduction, or grief support may help the hallucinations stop. People often hesitate to talk about hearing things because they fear judgment. But auditory hallucinations are more common than most think. Many people have had them once or twice in life, especially when tired, sick, or under pressure. The key difference is whether the sounds cause distress or interfere with daily life. Zeno's paradoxes are a group of problems about motion and time. A Greek philosopher named Zeno came up with them to show that movement might be an illusion. He used simple logic to create puzzles that seem to go against common sense. One of the best known is the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles, a fast runner, gives a slow-moving tortoise a head start in a race. Zeno argued that Achilles can never catch the tortoise. By the time Achilles reaches the spot where the tortoise started, the tortoise has moved ahead. When Achilles reaches that new spot, the tortoise has moved again. This keeps happening. Each time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has gone a little farther. So it seems Achilles never catches up. Another version is the paradox of the arrow. Zeno said that if you freeze time, an arrow in flight is motionless in each instant. Since time is made of these frozen moments, and the arrow doesn't move in any of them, how can it ever move at all? This challenges the idea that motion is real. There's also the paradox of the race course. Before reaching the end, you must get halfway. Before that, you must get a quarter of the way, then an eighth, and so on. This creates an endless number of steps. If you have to finish all those steps, how can you ever reach the end? Zeno's arguments rely on dividing space and time into smaller and smaller parts. Back then, people didn't have the tools to answer him. Today, math and physics explain it using the concept of limits. Even though there are infinite steps, their total length can still be finite. Achilles does catch the tortoise, and the arrow does move. Still, Zeno's paradoxes remain useful. They show how logic can produce strange results from simple ideas. They also remind us that motion and time, which feel obvious, can become puzzling when you look at them closely. The paradoxes challenge the way we understand space, speed, and how things change. Multitasking dilemmas happen when people try to do more than one task at the same time, but end up doing each one worse. The brain doesn't truly handle tasks in parallel. It switches back and forth. That switch costs time and energy, especially when tasks require focus or involve different skills. Take someone writing an email while also listening to a meeting. They think they're doing both at once, but in practice, their attention jumps from one to the other. Each time they shift, they lose track of details. The email might have mistakes. They may miss a key point in the meeting. The tasks don't overlap smoothly. They compete for attention. This gets worse when both tasks involve language or memory. Talking on the phone while reading a report is harder than talking while folding laundry. The brain uses the same parts for reading and listening, so it can't do both well at once. It becomes a juggling act, not true multitasking. In driving, this problem turns dangerous. Using a phone, even hands-free, makes the driver slower to react. They miss road signs or fail to notice changes in traffic. The brain treats the conversation as the main task and puts the road in the background. That's why distracted driving leads to more accidents, even when people think they're still in control. Multitasking can also lower the quality of work. A student switching between homework and social media may take longer to finish both. Errors increase, and the student remembers less. The brain needs time to refocus after each switch, which adds up fast. Some studies show that people who multitask often believe they're good at it. The test results show the opposite. Frequent multitaskers usually get distracted more easily and perform worse on tasks that need focus. The belief that they're being efficient doesn't match what's really happening. People face multitasking dilemmas when they try to save time but end up spreading attention too thin. The tasks feel done, but not done well. The cost is hidden in slower thinking, weaker memory, and small mistakes that add up over time. Contradictory social norms happen when society expects people to follow two rules that don't work well together. These norms can come from culture, tradition, gender roles, or group behavior. When they conflict, people feel pressure from both sides and can't fully satisfy either. One common example is the balance between honesty and politeness. People are told to always tell the truth, but also to be nice or don't hurt someone's feelings. These can clash in real life. If a friend asks for an opinion about a bad haircut, being honest may feel rude. Being kind may mean hiding the truth. Both norms are valued, but they push in opposite directions. Another example is how society views confidence, especially in the workplace. People are expected to be self-assured and speak up. But at the same time, they are warned not to be arrogant or too aggressive. This can create confusion, especially for women, who often face stronger backlash for behavior that seems bold in men, but is seen as pushy in women. The same action gets judged by different standards. Social norms about emotions can also conflict. People are told to be open about their feelings for mental health, but they also hear messages like, "Stay strong" or "Don't show weakness." This creates a dilemma, especially for men, who may want to express sadness or fear, but feel ashamed or judged for doing so. Even norms around work and family life clash. People are told to work hard and build careers, but also to spend time with family and maintain balance. In practice, many jobs demand long hours, and time with loved ones suffers. Both goals are seen as important, yet following one often means neglecting the other. These contradictions don't always have a clear fix. People must choose which norm to follow based on the situation, their values, or the risk of judgment. The stress comes not from breaking a rule, but from knowing that meeting one expectation means falling short of another. That tension shows how complex and sometimes unfair social rules can be. The liar paradox is a problem that happens when a statement refers to itself in a way that creates a loop. The classic example is the sentence, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then what it says must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. The sentence goes back and forth without settling. It can't be true or false without contradicting itself. This kind of loop causes problems in logic and language. Most statements we use are either true or false. The liar paradox doesn't fit that rule. It points to a flaw in the idea that every statement must have a clear truth value. There are many forms of the liar paradox. One example is a person who says, "I always lie." If they're telling the truth, then they lie, which means they're not telling the truth. But if they're lying, then they don't always lie, which means the statement is false. Again, it circles without a clear answer. This paradox isn't just a word game. It has serious effects in math, philosophy, and computer science. In the early 1900s, logician Kurt Gödel used a version of the liar paradox to show that some truths in math can't be proven within the system. His work changed how people understand what math can and cannot do. In computing, self-referential code can cause similar problems. If a program tries to check whether it will ever stop running, it can get stuck in a loop. This is part of the halting problem, which has no general solution. The same kind of logical tangle appears. Some thinkers have tried to fix the liar paradox by changing how we view language. They say some statements don't get a truth value at all, they're just errors. Others build layers of language where a sentence can't talk about its own truth. These solutions try to block the loop before it starts. The liar paradox shows that even simple language can break the rules when it turns back on itself. It reminds us that truth, logic, and meaning depend on structure, not just words. Moral gray areas are situations where right and wrong aren't clear. They involve choices that don't fit into simple categories of good or bad. People in these situations often have to balance competing values, where doing the right thing in one way means causing harm in another. Take the case of stealing medicine to save a life. A person can't afford a drug their child needs, so they break into a pharmacy to get it. Stealing is usually wrong, but letting someone die feels worse. The law says the act is a crime. Morally, though, many people feel the choice makes sense. It's not easy to say what the right answer is. Moral gray areas also come up in the workplace. A manager may have to lay off a few employees to keep the business from shutting down. The decision hurts people, but it may save the company and protect other jobs. Both outcomes involve harm. Choosing the lesser harm doesn't make the choice clean or simple. Loyalty and honesty can also conflict. Imagine a friend tells you something in confidence, and later you find out that keeping the secret could hurt someone else. Telling the truth might protect others, but it breaks your friend's trust. Keeping the secret respects loyalty, but allows harm to continue. Neither choice feels fully right or wrong. Cultural norms can add to the confusion. In one culture, speaking up may be seen as strong and honest. In another, it may be viewed as rude or disrespectful. A decision that looks moral in one setting may look wrong in another. People must weigh their own values against those of others around them. These gray areas force people to think deeply. They can't rely on simple rules. Instead, they have to consider context, intention, and outcomes. Even different people may reach different conclusions and all believe they acted in good faith. That's what makes moral gray areas hard to judge. They show that ethics often lives in the space between clear answers. The hard problem of consciousness asks why and how we have inner experience. It's not just about the brain doing tasks like seeing, hearing, or moving. It's about why those tasks come with a sense of being, what it feels like to see a color, taste food, or feel pain. Scientists can describe brain activity in great detail. They can show how light hits the eye, how signals move through the brain, and what parts become active. But none of that explains why those signals come with personal experience. You can measure a brain's response to red light, but that doesn't tell you why red feels the way it does. Philosopher David Chalmers gave this problem its name in the 1990s. He said the easy problems of consciousness deal with functions, how we focus attention, respond to stimuli, or store memories. The hard problem is explaining subjective experience, what it's like from the inside. Take pain as an example. You can study the nerves, track the chemicals, and see how someone reacts. But that still leaves the question, why does pain hurt? Why isn't it just information moving around? What turns data into feeling? Some researchers think the hard problem will disappear once we understand the brain better. They say consciousness might be a complex but natural result of brain processes. Others argue that no amount of brain science can explain the gap between function and feeling. This issue also affects how we think about animals, machines, and other people. If a robot says it's sad, does it feel sadness or just simulate it? If an octopus avoids harm, is it acting out of fear or just reacting to danger? These questions depend on whether we can tell who or what has real experience. The hard problem doesn't offer easy answers. It asks why matter arranged in a certain way, a brain, produces a mind. It points to a puzzle at the edge of science, where facts meet questions we don't yet know how to test. Attribution error happens when people explain someone's behavior in a way that overlooks the full picture. They tend to blame a person's character rather than looking at the situation. This is called the fundamental attribution error. It shows up often in daily life. Imagine someone cuts you off in traffic. You might think, that driver is rude or reckless, but maybe they're rushing to an emergency. You don't know the reason, but you still assume it's about who they are, not what's going on around them. The same thing can happen at work. If a coworker misses a deadline, you might say they're lazy or disorganized, but they may be dealing with too much work, unclear instructions, or a personal crisis. The mind jumps to judgment based on traits, not context. This error works differently when people judge themselves. If you arrive late, you might blame traffic or a bad night's sleep. You point to the situation, not your own habits. But when someone else is late, you're more likely to think they're careless. That gap between how we see others and how we see ourselves is part of attribution error. Culture can shape this pattern. In some Western countries, people often explain actions by focusing on the individual. In many Eastern cultures, people place more weight on social roles or context. That means attribution errors may be less common in some cultures than others. The error can also show up in positive situations. If someone succeeds, you may say it's due to talent or effort, but they may have had support, resources, or good timing. We often miss these outside factors unless we look for them. Psychologists study this bias to understand how people form opinions. It matters in school, business, law, and relationships. If we blame others too quickly, we risk acting unfairly or missing key facts. To reduce this error, it helps to pause and ask, what else might be going on? Taking context into account gives a fuller, more accurate view. It's not about excusing bad behavior, it's about understanding what drives it. The grandfather paradox is a time travel problem. It shows what can go wrong if someone changes the past. The basic idea is simple. You travel back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. That means your parent is never born, and neither are you. But if you were never born, how could you go back in time at all? This creates a loop that doesn't make sense. If you stop your grandfather from having children, you erase the reason you went back in time. But if you don't exist, then your grandfather's life goes on as normal. That would allow you to be born after all, which brings you back to the start of the loop. The paradox shows how cause and effect can break down when time travel is involved. Most things in life follow a clear order. A cause happens first, and the effect follows. Time travel flips that. The effect, you stopping your grandfather, happens before the cause, your birth, and that creates a contradiction. Science fiction uses this idea often. In many stories, someone changes the past and returns to a future that's completely different, or where they no longer exist. Movies and books use the grandfather paradox to explore how even small changes in the past could reshape the future. Physicists and philosophers take the paradox seriously, at least as a thought experiment. Some argue that the laws of the universe might prevent such contradictions. One idea is that events in the past fix themselves. You might go back in time, but something always stops you from changing key events. This idea is called the self-consistency principle. Others suggest that if you do change the past, it might create a new timeline or parallel universe. In that case, you still erase yourself in your original timeline, but your actions spin off a new version of history where events play out differently. The grandfather paradox raises deep questions about time, identity, and logic. It shows how something that sounds simple, changing the past, can lead to outcomes that don't fit the rules we usually live by. Color is both real and constructed. Light exists in the world as waves, each with a different length. Red has a long wavelength. Blue has a short one. These waves hit the eye and trigger cells in the retina called cones. The brain takes the signals from those cones and turns them into the experience of color. The physical part is real. Light behaves in measurable ways. You can test how different materials reflect or absorb light. You can use tools to check the wavelength. But the way we see color, that part comes from the brain. The color red is not in the light itself. It's in the mind interpreting the signal. Different species see color in different ways. Some birds and insects can see ultraviolet light, which humans can't. Dogs see fewer colors than we do. That means color is not the same for all eyes. Even between humans, there are differences. Someone with color blindness may not see red and green as separate colors. The world doesn't change, but their experience of it does. Color names are also shaped by culture. Some languages have many words for shades of one color. Others group what we call blue and green into one word. People from different cultures may even focus on different parts of the color spectrum based on how their language divides it. Scientists and philosophers debate what this means. Some say color is just how the brain handles light. Others argue that color is a real part of objects because it comes from how they reflect light. Still others see color as a relationship, something that exists only between a viewer and a surface under certain light. You can also look at illusions. In the checker shadow illusion, two squares that look like different colors are actually the same. The brain adjusts for shadows and light, changing how color is seen. That shows how much interpretation is involved. Color starts with light, but the experience of it is shaped by biology, culture, and context. So color is not just out there in the world. It's also something the brain creates. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut people use when judging how likely something is. Instead of looking at all the facts, they rely on how easily examples come to mind. If something is easier to remember, they believe it happens more often, even if that's not true. For example, if someone hears about several plane crashes on the news, they may start to think flying is dangerous. But flying is still much safer than driving. Plane crashes are rare, but they get a lot of attention. That makes them easier to recall, so people overestimate the risk. This happens in other areas too. After watching news stories about violent crime, someone might think crime rates are rising, even if data shows a drop. Because the stories are vivid and recent, they stick in memory. The brain uses what's available, not what's accurate. The availability heuristic can also affect personal choices. If a person hears about a friend who got sick from eating out, they may avoid restaurants for a while. That one example feels stronger than all the times they ate out with no problems. The brain weighs it more heavily simply because it's easier to picture. Marketing often uses this bias. A company may show a happy customer talking about how well a product worked. That single story can feel more convincing than a long list of facts. The personal story is easier to remember, so it carries more weight. The bias is not about being lazy or careless. It's the brain's way of saving time. Instead of analyzing everything, it grabs what's quick and clear. That works well in many cases, but leads to errors when what's memorable isn't common. Researchers have studied this by asking people to list examples. If they ask someone to name many times they were assertive, the person may start to think they're not very assertive because the task feels hard. When the brain struggles to find examples, it thinks the thing must be rare. When it finds them fast, it thinks the thing must be common. That's how the availability heuristic works. Color constancy illusions happen when the brain keeps a color looking the same even when the light changes. This usually helps us see the world clearly. A white shirt still looks white whether you're indoors or in sunlight. But sometimes, this system gets tricked and causes a color to look different from what it really is. One famous example is the dress. Some people saw it as blue and black, while others saw white and gold. The photo didn't give clear information about the light source, so the brain made a guess. If the brain thought the dress was in shadow, it removed the blue tone and showed white and gold. If it thought the light was warm, it removed yellow and showed blue and black. The actual image never changed. Only the brain's interpretation did. Another example is the checker shadow illusion. A shadow falls across a checkerboard. One square in the shadow looks much lighter than another outside the shadow. But when you check the pixel values, both squares are the same shade of gray. The brain sees the shadow and corrects for it, making the square inside it look brighter than it is. This process helps with color constancy. It keeps objects looking stable as lighting shifts. Without it, colors would constantly change with shadows, sun, or indoor lights. But when cues about light are unclear, the brain's correction can go too far or miss the mark. Shadows, reflections, and surrounding colors all affect how we see a surface. A red apple in bright sun will reflect more light than a red apple in shade, but we still see them as the same color. The brain filters the light and fills in what it thinks the color should be. That works most of the time. In illusions, it doesn't. Researchers use these illusions to study how perception works. They show that color is not just in the light hitting your eyes. It also depends on what your brain thinks is happening around that light. Color constancy helps with everyday tasks, but it also shows how much the brain shapes what we see. The simulation hypothesis is the idea that our reality might be a computer simulation. It suggests that everything we see, feel, and experience could be part of a digital world run by an advanced civilization. The theory does not say this is true. It just asks whether it's possible and how we could tell. The basic argument goes like this. If technology keeps improving, future civilizations might be able to simulate whole worlds with great detail. These simulated people would have thoughts, memories, and emotions, just like us. If they can run many of these worlds, then simulated beings might far outnumber real ones. If that's the case, the chance that we're one of the few real ones becomes very small. Philosopher Nick Bostrom put this idea into a clear argument. He said that one of three things must be true. Civilizations never reach the point where they can run realistic simulations. They reach that point but choose not to create them. Or they do create them and we are likely inside one. His argument doesn't say which is true. It just shows that the idea deserves serious thought. Some people compare this idea to video games or virtual reality. Games today already create detailed worlds with people and stories. The characters don't think, but the environments look real. If future computers get much faster, they might create whole worlds where the characters do think and don't know they're simulated. Others point to strange patterns in physics as signs we might live in a simulation. Some physical constants seem finely tuned. Quantum mechanics includes randomness and limits to what we can observe. Some say these could be signs of built-in rules or shortcuts, like those in software. Skeptics argue that the simulation hypothesis doesn't explain anything we couldn't already explain with science. It also can't be tested easily. If we're in a simulation, any test could be part of the simulation itself. Still, the question has value. It makes us think about the nature of reality, the limits of science, and how we define what is real. Whether or not we're in a simulation, the idea helps us look at the world with fresh eyes. Projection is a defense mechanism where a person takes their own thoughts or feelings and sees them in someone else. Instead of noticing anger, fear, or guilt in themselves, they believe it belongs to another person. The mind does this to avoid dealing with uncomfortable emotions directly. For example, someone who often feels jealous may accuse others of being jealous of them. They might say, "She's always trying to compete with me," even if that's not true. The real feeling, jealousy, starts inside them, but it feels easier to spot it in someone else than to face it head-on. Projection can show up in arguments. A person who feels guilty about lying might say, "I can't trust you anymore," even if the other person has been honest. The accusation shifts focus away from their own actions. This protects the ego from shame or conflict, but it also distorts the situation. In relationships, projection can create distance. If one partner feels insecure but can't express it, they may say, "You don't care about me," or "You're going to leave." These statements come from their own fear, not the other person's behavior. But if the pattern continues, it can push people apart. Projection isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, like assuming people dislike you when you don't like yourself, or thinking others are judging you when you're the one feeling unsure. The feelings are real, but the source gets misplaced. Psychologists study projection as part of how people cope with internal stress. It doesn't mean someone is being dishonest. The person often doesn't know they're doing it. The brain is trying to manage discomfort by shifting it outside. Therapy can help people notice when they project. Once they see the pattern, they can begin to ask, "Is this really about the other person, or is it something in me?" That question makes space for reflection instead of blame. Projection doesn't make someone bad. It shows they may need help facing something they haven't fully processed. Inattentional blindness happens when you miss something in plain sight because your attention is focused elsewhere. It's not a problem with your eyes. It's how the brain filters information. You can only pay attention to so much at once. When your mind locks onto a task, it can block out things you're not looking for, even if they're right in front of you. One well-known example is the invisible gorilla experiment. in the study. People watched a video of players passing a basketball and were asked to count the passes. While they focused on the passes, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the scene, paused, and beat their chest. After the video, many viewers said they never saw the gorilla. Their attention on the ball made them blind to everything else. This kind of blindness shows up in daily life. A driver looking for a parking spot may not notice a pedestrian stepping into the street. A worker focused on reading an email might miss a fire alarm going off. It's not that these people aren't paying attention at all. It's that their attention is locked onto one thing, making them miss another. Inattentional blindness is more likely when the unexpected object is not part of what you're expecting. If you're searching for spelling errors in a report, you might miss a missing page or a change in font. The brain prioritizes what it thinks is important and ignores what seems unrelated. This effect is useful in psychology and safety studies. It helps explain why people sometimes fail to notice hazards or changes in their environment. It also shows that awareness is not just about where you look, it's about where your mind is focused. Even trained professionals can experience this. Pilots, doctors, and police officers have missed key details during high-stress tasks because they were focused on something else. Knowing this can help people build better systems, like alerts or checklists, to reduce the risk. Inattentional blindness is not about carelessness. It's about how attention works and how easy it is to miss what you're not looking. What happens after death is one of the oldest and most personal questions people ask. Different cultures, religions, and sciences give different answers. Some speak of an afterlife. Others focus on what the body and brain go through as life ends. From a biological view, death happens when the heart stops beating and the brain stops working. Blood no longer flows. Cells lose oxygen. The body begins to break down. This is the physical end of life. The senses shut down and awareness fades. Scientists can describe this process in detail, but that doesn't answer the deeper question. What, if anything, happens to the mind or soul? Religious traditions offer a range of beliefs. Many believe in an afterlife, heaven, hell, rebirth, or some form of continued existence. In Christianity, death may lead to judgment and either reward or punishment. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the soul may be reborn based on karma. These ideas give comfort and structure to the mystery. They also shape how people live their lives, guiding moral choices and community values. Other views say that consciousness ends with brain activity. Once the brain stops, awareness ends, much like a light going out. In this view, death is not painful or frightening. It's simply the end of experience. You don't feel fear or peace. You don't feel anything at all. Some people report near-death experiences. They describe lights, floating sensations, or feelings of peace. These reports are vivid and meaningful to those who have them. Scientists often link them to changes in the brain under extreme stress or lack of oxygen. Whether they show something beyond life or just what the brain does as it shuts down remains an open question. Philosophers ask whether personal identity survives death. If memory and thought depend on the brain, then losing the brain may mean losing the self. Others argue that part of the self could exist beyond the body, though no one has proven this. Death raises questions that don't have clear answers. People turn to faith, science, or personal reflection to make sense of it. Each answer depends on what you believe about life, mind, and what it means to be human. Consciousness is the state of being aware of yourself and the world around you. It includes your thoughts, feelings, senses, and experiences. When you feel pain, hear music, or think about a memory, you are conscious. It's what allows you to reflect, make choices, and notice what's happening both inside and outside your body. Scientists often break consciousness into parts. One part is wakefulness, being alert and responsive. The other is awareness, knowing what's happening. For example, Someone in a deep coma has no wakefulness or awareness. Someone in a light sleep may wake easily but isn't fully aware. Consciousness is highest when both are present, like during normal waking life. Many researchers focus on two questions. First, what parts of the brain produce consciousness? Second, how do brain signals create the feeling of experience? Studies show that certain brain areas, like the cortex and thalamus, play key roles. Damage to these parts can reduce or erase consciousness. Still, no one fully understands how nerve signals turn into thoughts or feelings. Philosophers have long asked what it means to be conscious. Some say it's not just about reacting to the world, but about having an inner life, a point of view. A robot can follow commands, but does it know what it's doing? Can it feel? Without experience, there is no consciousness, only behavior. Tests for consciousness can be simple, like asking questions and looking for answers. In medicine, doctors check whether a person can respond to touch, sound, or light. In research, they also study animals and machines to see if they show signs of awareness. But because consciousness is private, something only you can feel, it's hard to measure from the outside. There are also degrees of consciousness. You can be fully alert, distracted, daydreaming, or under anesthesia. Each state shows different levels of awareness. Even during sleep, the brain stays partly active. Dreams are one sign that consciousness doesn't always turn off completely. In the end, consciousness is what makes experience possible. It is not just a switch, but a range of states shaped by the brain, the body, and the world. An illusory correlation is when people see a connection between two things that don't actually relate. The brain notices a pattern, but the link isn't real. This happens because the mind likes to find order, even when none exists. It often leads to wrong beliefs, false stereotypes, or poor decisions. One classic example is believing that full moons cause more crime or strange behavior. People may recall unusual events that happened during a full moon, but forget all the times nothing unusual happened. The brain focuses on the few matches and ignores the rest. Studies show no strong link between full moons and crime, yet the belief remains common. Another example comes from stereotypes. If someone meets a person from a small group who acts rudely, they might assume the whole group behaves that way. The rare behavior stands out, and the brain connects it to the person's group, rather than seeing it as an individual action. That false link can grow stronger over time, especially when repeated in stories or media. The effect also shows up in personal life. A person may think they always get sick after eating a certain food, even when that's not true. They remember the few times they felt bad and ignore the times they ate the food with no problem. The pattern feels real, but data doesn't back it up. Psychologists study this using simple experiments. One common setup shows people fake profiles of two groups doing good and bad actions. If one group is smaller, the bad actions seem more noticeable, even if both groups behave the same way. This shows how rare events in small groups can lead to false impressions. Illusory correlations can spread quickly because they feel like common sense. They form fast and are hard to unlearn. The brain wants to simplify the world, so it links things that seem to go together, even without proof. To avoid this error, it helps to ask, is there real evidence for this link, or am I just seeing what I expect? Slowing down that first reaction can lead to better thinking. Gödel's incompleteness theorems show that in any system of math based on clear rules and logic, some true statements can't be proven within that system. Mathematician Kurt Gödel published these results in 1931. His work changed how people think about math, logic, and what can be known. Before Gödel, many believed that all of math could be built from a small set of rules. These rules would be complete, able to prove every truth, and consistent, never lead to contradictions. Gödel showed that this goal can't be reached. His first theorem says that in any system complex enough to include basic arithmetic, there will always be true statements that the system cannot prove. That means math has limits. Some truths can't be reached just by following the rules. They are true, but unprovable within the system. He proved this by using logic to build a strange kind of sentence. It was a math statement that said, in effect, this statement cannot be proven. If the system could prove it, then the system would prove something false, which would make the system inconsistent. But if the system couldn't prove it, then the sentence would be true, yet unprovable. Either way, the system fails to be both complete and consistent. His second theorem goes further. It says that a system cannot prove its own consistency. In other words, if you want to be sure that math never leads to a contradiction, you can't prove that using only math's own rules. You have to step outside the system. These ideas have deep effects. They show that there are limits to logic and formal reasoning. Even the most careful systems leave some truths out of reach. Gödel's work applies mainly to math and logic, but it also raises questions in philosophy, computing, and even human thought. It shows that certainty has limits, even when you follow every rule exactly. Gödel proved that math is powerful, but not complete. There will always be truths that no system can fully capture. Identity paradoxes raise questions about what makes something or someone the same over time, even as parts change. One well-known example is the ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship kept in a museum. Over the years, workers replace its wooden boards one by one. After many years, none of the original parts remain. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine someone saved the old boards and rebuilt the original ship with them. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This puzzle shows how tricky identity can be when change happens slowly. If we say the museum ship is the same because its change was gradual, we have to accept that identity doesn't depend on the original material. But if we say the rebuilt ship is the real one, then identity depends on the parts, not the history. Either way, we face a conflict. A similar issue comes up with people. Your body replaces cells over time. Your beliefs, memories, and habits change too, yet you still think of yourself as the same person you were 10 years ago. What stays the same? Some say identity comes from memory. Others say it's about the body or the brain. But what if someone loses their memory or changes in personality after an injury? Are they still the same person? In modern times, identity paradoxes also apply to digital life. If you upload your mind to a computer, is that digital copy still you? What if the copy makes choices and forms memories you never had? If the original body still exists, are there now two versions of the same person? These paradoxes don't always have clear answers. They reveal that identity isn't just about facts. It's also about how we define continuity. Some views focus on physical parts. Others focus on patterns, like memory or behavior. In law and ethics, we often treat identity as something stable. But in philosophy, it becomes a shifting question. Identity paradoxes force us to ask what it really means to stay the same when everything else changes. They show how hard it is to draw a clear line between who we are and who we used to be. Split brain phenomena come from a rare surgery that cuts the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves connecting the two halves of the brain. Doctors sometimes perform this procedure to treat severe epilepsy. After surgery, each side of the brain still works, but they can't talk to each other in the usual way. The left side of the brain controls speech and logic in most people. The right side handles visual and spatial tasks. When the brain is split, these abilities stay in place, but communication between the two halves changes. This creates unusual effects in how people see, speak, and act. In one experiment, a researcher shows a word to only the left visual field, which sends information to the right brain. The person can't say the word out loud because the right brain has no access to language, but the person can draw the object with their left hand, which is controlled by the right brain. That means the brain saw and understood the word, it just couldn't talk about it. In another case, a split-brain patient might be shown a spoon in the left visual field. When asked what they saw, they say nothing. But if asked to pick out the object from a group using their left hand, they pick the spoon. The right brain saw it, but the left brain, which speaks, didn't. Sometimes the hands act on their own. One hand may button a shirt, while the other unbuttons it. This shows each side of the brain acting with some independence. It's not that the person has two minds, but each half follows its own input when the link is cut. These findings help scientists learn how the brain works. They show that consciousness and behavior are built from many parts working together. When that link is broken, the brain still works, but in a different way. Split brain studies raise big questions about awareness, identity, and how the mind forms a single experience. They show that even a brain divided in two can still think, see, and respond, just not always as one. Time dilation is a concept from Einstein's theory of relativity. It means that time does not pass at the same rate for everyone. The flow of time can slow down depending on how fast something moves or how close it is to a strong source of gravity. This idea goes against everyday experience, but experiments confirm it. The most common example is based on speed. According to special relativity, when an object moves close to the speed of light, time slows down for it compared to someone standing still. Imagine two twins. One stays on Earth. The other travels through space at near light speed. When the space traveler returns, they have aged less than the twin on Earth. From their point of view, less time passed. This is not just a thought experiment. Scientists have tested it using atomic clocks. If you place one clock on a fast-moving jet and keep the other on the ground, the moving clock ticks more slowly. The difference is small at everyday speeds, but it grows at higher speeds. The second form of time dilation happens near gravity. General relativity shows that time slows down near a strong gravitational field. The closer you are to something massive, like a black hole, the slower time moves for you. If someone stayed near the edge of a black hole for a short while, years might pass for someone far away. A simple example is GPS satellites. They orbit the Earth and move fast. They also sit farther from the planet's surface, where gravity is weaker. Both speed and gravity affect how their clocks tick. Engineers must adjust for time dilation to keep GPS systems accurate. Without correction, location data would quickly become wrong. Time dilation does not mean you feel time change. A person in a fast-moving spaceship or near a black hole would not notice anything different. But when they return or compare clocks, the difference becomes clear. Time itself is not fixed. It depends on motion and gravity, and this changes how events unfold for different observers. The barber paradox is a logic problem. It asks a simple question. In a town, the barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. So who shaves the barber? At first, this seems harmless, but when you look closer, it causes a problem. Let's break it down. If the barber shaves himself, then he must not shave himself, because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he does not shave himself, then he must shave himself, because he shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. Both answers lead to contradictions. The question creates a loop that cannot resolve. This paradox was made popular by Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher and logician. He used it to show a flaw in set theory, a part of mathematics. Think of a set as a group of things. Now, imagine a set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then it should not. If it doesn't, then it should. Just like the barber, this creates a loop. The barber is not a real person. He is a stand-in for this idea. But the example makes the problem easier to understand. It shows how rules can break down if they are not defined carefully. In math and logic, we must be clear about what belongs where. Think of a library with a rule. Every book that does not mention itself goes in a special section. Now, one day, a librarian writes a book titled Books That Do Not Mention Themselves. Should that book go in the special section? If it goes in, then it mentions itself by being in the list. If it stays out, then it does not mention itself and should go in. Again, we see a contradiction. This kind of paradox teaches us that language and logic need limits. Without clear boundaries, rules can fold in on themselves. That's why modern logic systems add safeguards to avoid problems like the barber. Optimism bias is the belief that things will turn out better for you than for others. It's a mental shortcut. Your brain leans toward the idea that you'll succeed, stay healthy, or avoid bad luck, even when the facts don't back it up. This bias helps people stay hopeful, but it can also cause poor decisions. Imagine two people starting a business. Both know that most small businesses fail within 5 years. Still, each believes their own business will beat the odds. They see the risk, but think it applies more to others. That's optimism bias. It pushes people to focus on the good outcome and ignore the bad. This bias shows up in many parts of life. People underestimate how long a task will take. Students think they'll finish homework early, but often miss the mark. Drivers believe they're less likely to get into an accident, even when texting or speeding. Smokers admit smoking is harmful, but believe they personally won't get lung disease. Optimism bias doesn't come from ignoring facts. It comes from how we see ourselves. Most people believe they have more control over events than they do. They think they are smarter, more careful, or better prepared than others. This makes the risks feel smaller, even if they are the same for everyone. In some cases, this bias helps. It can motivate people to try new things or push through hard times. But it becomes a problem when it hides real danger. Someone might skip insurance because they think nothing bad will happen. Or they might take on debt, believing future income will cover it, even without a solid plan. One example is how people prepare for natural disasters. Even in high-risk areas, many don't take warnings seriously. They believe a flood or fire won't hit them, though it has happened to their neighbors. The same pattern plays out in health, money, and even relationships. To manage optimism bias, it helps to slow down and check the facts. Look at data, not just gut feelings. Ask what you'd tell a friend in your place. That can reveal what you're avoiding and help you act with more care. Quantum uncertainty is the idea that at a very small scale, like atoms and particles, things are not as predictable as we expect. In the world of everyday objects, we can often measure things precisely. We can know the speed of a car or the position of a person. But when we look at particles, things change. One of the most famous examples of quantum uncertainty comes from the work of physicist Werner Heisenberg. He showed that we cannot know both the exact position and the exact speed of a particle at the same time. The more precisely we try to measure one, the less precisely we can measure the other. This is called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It's not because of limitations in our tools, but because of how particles behave at the quantum level. Let's imagine a tiny ball bouncing around. In the regular world, you can measure where the ball is and how fast it's moving at the same time. But in the quantum world, trying to find the exact position of a particle makes it harder to know its speed. If you focus on its speed, you lose information about where it is. This uncertainty is a natural part of the way quantum particles behave. This principle has real-world effects. It means that the behavior of particles cannot be predicted exactly. Instead, scientists can only talk about probabilities. For example, they might say there's a 70% chance a particle will be in a certain place, but there's always a chance it will be somewhere else. A simple way to think about it is to imagine trying to find a hidden ball in a dark room. The more you try to pin down its position, the harder it becomes to figure out how fast it's moving, and vice versa. This is the essence of quantum uncertainty. It shapes the way everything from light to atoms behaves and makes the quantum world very different from the world we see around us. The anchoring effect is a psychological bias where people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they encounter, which is called the anchor when making decisions. This anchor serves as a reference point, and it influences how we evaluate subsequent information, often leading us to make judgments that are biased or not fully rational. For example, if you walk into a store and see a jacket priced at $500, that price becomes your anchor. Later, if you see another jacket marked at $200, you might think it's a good deal, even though $200 might still be expensive for that jacket. The $500 price has skewed your perception of what a reasonable price should be. This effect also works in negotiations. Suppose you're buying a car and the salesperson starts by offering you a car at $30,000. Even if you end up negotiating the price down to $27,000, you might feel like you've gotten a great deal, even though $27,000 could still be more than what the car is worth. The $30,000 initial offer anchored your expectations. Anchoring can influence many areas of life. In real estate, for instance, the initial listing price of a home sets a reference point for potential buyers. If a house is listed for $350,000 but later drops to $300,000, people may view the $300,000 price as a bargain, even if it is still above market value for similar homes in the area. The anchoring effect works because our brains are wired to rely on the first piece of information we receive, even if it's irrelevant or misleading. Once that anchor is set, we struggle to adjust fully, even when better or more accurate information comes our way. This is why anchors can have such a strong influence on decision-making, often leading to less than ideal choices. The ship of Theseus is an old thought experiment that asks whether an object remains the same if all of its parts are replaced over time. The story begins with a ship owned by the mythical Greek hero Theseus. As the ship ages, the planks and parts of the ship are replaced one by one until every single part is new. The question is it still the same ship? To make this clearer, imagine you have an old car. Over the years, you replace the engine, the tires, and the seats. Eventually, everything in the car is new, and nothing of the original car remains. Is it still the same car, or is it a completely new one? Now, take it a step further. Suppose someone collects all the original parts you've replaced and builds a car using them. Which car is the true car? The one with all the new parts, or the one made from the original pieces? This is the essence of the ship of Theseus puzzle. This question isn't just about ships or cars. It touches on deeper issues like identity and change. For example, think about people. We constantly change our cells, tissues, and even parts of our personality over time. Are we still the same person we were years ago, or are we someone different? This thought experiment also raises questions in areas like technology and artificial intelligence. If you replace all the parts of a robot or an AI system, is it still the same machine? Or has it become something new? The ship of Theseus challenges us to think about what makes something the same over time. Is it the physical parts, or is it something deeper, like the purpose or function of the object? The puzzle doesn't have a clear answer, but it helps us reflect on how we define identity and continuity in a world that is always changing. In-group, out-group bias is a natural tendency for people to favor those they see as part of their own group while treating others outside that group with less trust or respect. This bias often starts with small groups, but can grow to affect larger social groups like communities, religions, or even entire countries. Imagine you're part of a local sports team. You and your teammates spend a lot of time together, practice, and build strong bonds. Naturally, you'll feel closer to your teammates than to members of the rival team. You may believe your team is better, even if the other team has similar skill levels. This is in-group bias, where you favor your own group over others, simply because you are a part of it. This bias can extend to many areas of life. For example, in the workplace, employees in one department may feel more connected to each other than to those in other departments. This can lead to misunderstandings or even conflicts between groups. The in-group will assume that their way of doing things is the best, while viewing the out-group's methods with suspicion or dislike. In extreme cases, in-group, out-group bias can lead to discrimination. For example, if one group of people views another group as outsiders based on race, religion, or nationality, they may treat them unfairly or dismiss them altogether. This is a harmful result of bias that can create divisions within society. The bias isn't always negative, but it can limit how people interact with each other. It can create barriers that make it harder to understand and empathize with others. The more people see themselves as separate from others, the more likely they are to judge them unfairly. This can influence everything from everyday decisions to major societal issues. Whether in a small setting or a larger context, this bias shapes how we perceive and treat people who aren't part of our group. The Sorites paradox, also known as the heap problem, is a puzzle that questions how small changes can add up to a significant difference. The problem starts with a simple scenario. If you have a heap of sand and you remove one grain of sand at a time, at what point does it stop being a heap? Let's say you have a large pile of sand. If you remove just one grain, you still have what most would call a heap. But what if you continue removing grains? At some point, it's no longer a heap, but when exactly does it stop being one? The paradox shows how hard it is to draw a clear line between a heap of sand and just a small pile. To make this clearer, imagine you're looking at a stack of books. If you remove one book, it's still a stack, right? But if you keep removing one book at a time, eventually you'll reach a point where there are no books left. At what point did it stop being a stack and just become a single book or a few books? The paradox shows how difficult it is to say exactly when the change happens. This problem is not just about sand or books. It applies to many situations in life. For instance, if someone is gradually losing weight, at what point do they stop being overweight? Or if someone starts getting older, at what age do they stop being considered young? The Sorites paradox highlights a challenge in how we think about categories and definitions. It asks us to reconsider how we draw lines between different ideas or groups. The issue is that small, seemingly insignificant changes can lead to a big difference, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly when the change occurs. This puzzle doesn't have a clear answer, but encourages us to think more carefully about how we classify things in the world. The Banach-Tarski paradox is a surprising result in mathematics that challenges our usual understanding of space and volume. It suggests that it's possible, under certain conditions, to take a solid object, like a ball, and divide it into a finite number of pieces. Then, by rearranging those pieces, you can create two identical copies of the original ball. This seems impossible in the real world, but in pure mathematics, it works. To help make sense of this, imagine you have a perfect sphere, like a ball. The Banach-Tarski paradox says that if you cut the ball into a specific number of pieces, using very complicated, non-intuitive methods, you can take those pieces and rearrange them in such a way that you end up with two balls, each the same size as the original one. So with just a few cuts and no stretching or bending, you've doubled the number of balls. This paradox works because it relies on abstract mathematical principles that don't apply to the physical world. In real life, if you cut a ball into pieces, you can't just rearrange them to make two identical balls. The pieces would lose their original structure, and the volume wouldn't stay the same. However, in the theoretical world of mathematics, these rules are different. The pieces in the Banach-Tarski paradox are not physical objects. They are abstract sets that don't behave the way things do in everyday life. The paradox is based on the idea of infinity and the fact that in higher mathematics, objects can be split in ways that we can't physically do. It's a result that's hard to wrap your mind around because it goes against everything we experience in the physical world. It shows how mathematical concepts can sometimes defy our common sense and lead to conclusions that seem impossible when applied to real objects. Flashbulb memories are vivid, detailed memories of significant events, often with strong emotional connections. These memories stand out because they feel like snapshots, as if they were captured by a camera in your mind. People tend to remember where they were, what they were doing, and who they were with when something important happened. For example, think about the day you first heard about a major event, like a national tragedy or a life-changing personal experience. Many people vividly recall exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news. You might remember the exact moment the news came on TV, the sounds around you, or the emotions you felt at the time. These memories seem clearer than other everyday memories, even though they may not always be perfectly accurate. Flashbulb memories can be tied to both positive and negative events. For instance, you might clearly remember the day you got engaged or the birth of a child. On the other hand, you might have a strong memory of where you were when you learned about a natural disaster or an accident. In both cases, the emotional impact makes the memory more vivid and lasting. Interestingly, people often believe that their flashbulb memories are perfectly accurate. However, studies have shown that, like other types of memories, flashbulb memories can change over time. The details may become distorted or influenced by later information. For example, you might remember specific details of an event, but later learn that some of those details were wrong. Flashbulb memories also show how emotions affect memory. The stronger the emotional reaction to an event, the more likely it is that the memory will be vivid and long-lasting. This can help explain why certain moments, like a wedding or a personal loss, stay with us so clearly over time. Episodic memory and semantic memory are two types of long-term memory, but they serve different purposes. Episodic memory refers to our ability to remember personal events and experiences. These are memories tied to specific moments in time, often with details about where you were, who you were with, and what happened. For example, you might clearly remember the day you graduated from school, the people you saw, and the feelings you had. This type of memory is like a mental video of a personal event. On the other hand, semantic memory is the memory of facts and general knowledge that are not tied to specific events. These are things you know but don't necessarily remember when or where you learned them. For example, knowing that Paris is the capital of France or that the Earth orbits the Sun is part of your semantic memory. You don't recall the exact moment you learned these facts, but you know them as general knowledge. Sometimes, people confuse the two types of memory because they both involve information we store in our minds. A common confusion occurs when someone remembers a fact but cannot recall the specific event when they learned it. For instance, you might know how to ride a bike, but you may not remember the exact day you first learned. The ability to ride a bike is stored in your semantic memory, but the event of learning it would be stored in your episodic memory, even though you might have no clear recollection of that day. The difference becomes even clearer when considering how the brain processes these memories. Episodic memories are often tied to specific times and places, while semantic memories are more like stored knowledge that is used in everyday life. Both types of memory help you make sense of the world, but they do so in different ways, each contributing to your understanding and experience of life. The Chinese room argument is a thought experiment designed to challenge the idea that a machine or computer can truly understand language. Imagine a person who doesn't know any Chinese is locked in a room with a large set of instructions written in English for how to respond to Chinese characters. This person can use the instructions to match the Chinese characters to the right responses, even though they have no idea what the symbols mean. To anyone outside the room, it would look like the person inside understands Chinese because the responses seem correct. However, the person inside the room is just following a set of rules and has no understanding of the language. The argument suggests that just because a machine can produce answers that seem correct, it doesn't mean the machine truly understands the meaning behind the words. For example, if a computer program can hold a conversation in English, it might appear to understand the conversation, but like the person in the Chinese room, the program is simply using rules to generate responses without truly grasping the meaning behind them. The Chinese room is often used to question whether artificial intelligence can ever really understand the way humans do, or if it will always just simulate understanding. It draws a distinction between being able to process information and having a deeper comprehension of that information. In the case of the person in the room, they're able to produce the right answers without any real understanding, which parallels how some people view machines or AI. They may be able to process language, but not truly understand it in the way humans do. This thought experiment doesn't deny that machines can be useful or perform tasks that appear intelligent. It simply raises the question of whether true understanding is something machines can achieve, or if it's something uniquely human. Cognitive empathy and emotional empathy are two different ways of understanding and connecting with others, though both are important in social interactions. Cognitive empathy is the ability to understand someone else's thoughts, feelings, or perspective. It's about seeing things from their point of view without necessarily feeling what they are feeling. For example, if a friend tells you they're upset about a work issue, cognitive empathy allows you to recognize why they feel the way they do and to understand the situation from their perspective. You might say, "I see how frustrating that must be for you," but you don't necessarily feel their frustration yourself. On the other hand, emotional empathy is the ability to actually feel the emotions of another person. When you have emotional empathy, you experience the same feelings as the person you're connecting with. If your friend is upset, emotional empathy would make you feel sad or anxious along with them. This type of empathy is more about shared emotional experience than understanding. The difference between the two becomes clearer in situations where understanding and feeling are distinct. For example, a therapist may need to use cognitive empathy when working with a client. The therapist must understand the client's emotions to help guide them through problems, but they might not want to feel overwhelmed by the client's sadness. This allows them to stay focused on providing support. In contrast, emotional empathy would be important in close relationships, where sharing emotional experiences can help strengthen bonds. For instance, if a family member is grieving, emotional empathy would allow you to feel their sorrow and offer comfort more genuinely. Both types of empathy are useful in different situations. Cognitive empathy helps in problem solving and understanding, while emotional empathy allows for deeper emotional connections. The self refers to the concept of who we are as individuals. It includes our sense of identity, our thoughts, feelings, and experiences. It's the mental picture we have of ourselves and how we relate to the world around us. The self helps us understand our actions, desires, and how we fit into the broader society. At its core, the self is shaped by both internal factors, like our personality and beliefs, and external factors, like our environment and relationships. For example, a person might see themselves as someone who values honesty. This internal belief becomes part of their self-image. Similarly, if they are often praised for their honesty by others, this feedback reinforces their sense of who they are. Over time, these elements build up into a broader sense of self. The self is also tied to memory. Our sense of who we are often comes from the way we recall past events and experiences. For example, you might remember a time when you helped a friend, and this memory helps define you as a caring person. In this way, the self is closely linked to personal history. Additionally, the self is dynamic, meaning it changes over time. As we experience new events, meet different people, and go through life's challenges, our sense of self can shift. For example, someone who is shy in childhood may become more confident as they grow older. This flexibility allows people to adapt to new situations, but it can also lead to confusion or uncertainty about one's identity. The way we see ourselves can also affect our behavior. If we view ourselves as someone who is good at a certain skill, like playing the guitar, we're more likely to practice and improve. On the other hand, if we see ourselves as shy, we may avoid social situations. In short, the self is a complex blend of personal beliefs, memories, and external influences that shape how we understand who we are and how we interact with the world. Higher dimensional space refers to spaces that have more than the 3 dimensions we are familiar with: length, width, and height. In everyday life, we live in a 3-dimensional world where objects have height, width, and depth. However, in mathematics and physics, spaces with more than 3 dimensions are used to describe more complex systems. For example, in a 2-dimensional space, like a flat plane, you can move in 2 directions: up, down, and left, right. In 3-dimensional space, you can also move forward and backward, adding a 3rd direction. Higher dimensional spaces add even more directions. In a 4-dimensional space, for instance, you would have an extra direction to move in. But this direction isn't something we can easily imagine because our experience is limited to 3 dimensions. In higher dimensional spaces, each additional dimension adds a new way to position or move objects. While we can't physically see or touch these extra dimensions, they are useful in areas like physics and computer science. For example, in physics, higher dimensional spaces are used in theories about the universe, such as string theory, which suggests there could be many more dimensions beyond the ones we can perceive. In computer science, higher dimensional spaces are used to organize complex data, such as images or videos, into more manageable forms. One way to think about higher dimensional space is through the example of a cube. In 3 dimensions, a cube has length, width, and height. If we move into 4 dimensions, a 4-dimensional cube would have an additional direction that is hard to visualize, but it still follows the same idea as a regular cube. It's just in a higher dimensional space. These extra dimensions don't need to be physically seen to be useful, and they help describe systems that are too complicated to fit into the 3 dimensions we experience every day. Memory suppression is the process of deliberately trying to forget or block out certain memories, often because they are painful, stressful, or unpleasant. People use this strategy as a way to protect themselves from emotional distress. For example, if someone experiences a traumatic event, like an accident or the loss of a loved one, they might try to suppress the memories of that event in order to avoid feeling the pain associated with it. This type of memory suppression can happen consciously or unconsciously. In some cases, a person may be fully aware that they are trying to forget something, like when someone tries to push away thoughts about a difficult breakup. In other cases, the suppression happens without the person even realizing it. For example, someone might forget a traumatic event over time because their brain has suppressed the memory as a defense mechanism. Although memory suppression can help people cope with painful experiences in the short term, it can also have negative effects. Suppressed memories can resurface unexpectedly, causing emotional distress when they do. This is why some people with suppressed memories may experience anxiety or other emotional problems, especially when something triggers a forgotten memory. For example, a person who has suppressed memories of a car crash may suddenly feel a surge of fear when driving, even though they don't consciously remember the crash. In some situations, trying to suppress memories can make them stronger or more persistent. Studies have shown that the more we try to push a memory away, the more it can come back to our minds. This is known as the rebound effect, where trying to forget something can actually lead to remembering it more. Memory suppression is a complex process that involves both mental and emotional factors. While it can provide temporary relief, it may also lead to long-term consequences for mental health, especially if the suppressed memories are never fully addressed. Mary's room is a thought experiment used to explore the concept of qualia, which refers to the personal, subjective experience of things. The scenario involves a woman named Mary, who is a brilliant scientist. She has spent her entire life in a black and white room, studying color and learning everything there is to know about how the brain processes color. Mary knows all the scientific facts about color, such as how light wavelengths work and how the brain interprets them. However, she has never actually seen color herself because she has been in the room, which has no color. The thought experiment asks, what happens when Mary leaves the room and finally sees color for the first time? Does she learn something new? The idea is that even though she already knows all the facts about color, her experience of actually seeing it will give her new knowledge. This suggests that there is something more to consciousness than just information. Mary gains what's called qualia, the unique personal experience of seeing red, blue, or any color, which cannot be fully understood through facts alone. For example, imagine you've read everything there is to know about the taste of chocolate, including how its chemicals affect the brain. If we've never tasted chocolate, you don't truly know what it's like. The facts might tell you everything about how chocolate works, but they don't provide the experience itself, the qualia of tasting chocolate. The Mary's room thought experiment raises questions about the nature of consciousness and whether we can truly understand what it's like to experience something from another person's point of view. It challenges the idea that knowing all the facts about something is the same as experiencing it. Even if we have complete knowledge about a subject, we might still lack the direct, personal experience that defines what it is truly like to be conscious of it. Contradictory social norms are expectations within society that conflict with one another, creating confusion or pressure for individuals. These norms can often make it difficult for people to know how to behave in different situations, as they are told to act in one way in one context, but in the opposite way in another. For example, in many cultures, people are expected to be both independent and cooperative. On one hand, society encourages individuals to stand out, take care of themselves, and pursue personal goals. On the other hand, people are also expected to work well with others, put the group's needs first, and follow shared rules. These two expectations can be hard to balance. A person might feel pressure to prioritize their personal success while also being expected to work as part of a team, which can sometimes feel like a contradiction. Another common example is the way people are expected to look and act in different settings. In the workplace, many places value professionalism, which can mean dressing conservatively and keeping emotions in check. But in social settings, people may be encouraged to express themselves more freely and show their emotions. The expectation to be both reserved and open can cause confusion about how to present oneself. Gender norms also often contain contradictions. For instance, in some societies, men are expected to be strong, decisive, and unemotional. Yet they may also be expected to be caring, nurturing, and emotionally available to their families. These two roles can be hard to reconcile and often lead to stress or confusion for individuals trying to meet both expectations. Contradictory social norms can create tension in people's lives as they try to follow conflicting guidelines. They may feel uncertain about how to behave, and sometimes even guilty or frustrated when they don't meet all the expectations placed upon them. This conflict highlights the complexity of social life and how norms shape our behavior in often contradictory ways. The observer effect refers to the idea that just by observing or measuring something, we can change it. This concept is especially important in fields like science and physics, where the act of observing an experiment can affect the outcome. One classic example comes from quantum physics. In some experiments, the behavior of tiny particles, like electrons, can change depending on whether they are being observed. For instance, in the famous double-slit experiment. Electrons can act like waves or particles, but once someone observes them, they behave as particles. The act of measuring or watching the electrons causes them to behave differently than if they were left alone. In everyday life, the observer effect can also show up in social situations. For example, if someone knows they are being watched, they might change their behavior. A student who knows their teacher is observing them may act more focused or follow the rules more strictly than they would if they weren't being watched. This change in behavior happens because the student is aware of the observer, even though the teacher's presence doesn't directly affect the task at hand. The observer effect also applies to research and experiments. When scientists conduct studies, they try to limit the influence of the observer because even their presence can influence how participants act. For example, if people know they are part of a study, they may act differently than they would in everyday situations, which could affect the results. This effect highlights an important point. When we observe or measure something, we don't always get an untouched view of reality. The act of observation can alter what we are observing, which is something scientists and researchers must carefully consider when designing experiments or collecting data. Russell's paradox is a problem in logic that shows how certain systems of classification can lead to contradictions. It focuses on the idea of sets, which are collections of things, and how some sets can be defined in a way that causes confusion. Imagine a set of all sets that do not contain themselves. For example, the set of all red cars does not contain itself because it is not a red car. Now, let's consider the set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves. The question arises, does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition, it should not contain itself because it's only supposed to include sets that don't contain themselves. But if it doesn't contain itself, then it should contain itself because it fits the rule of being a set that doesn't contain itself. This creates a paradox, a situation where both possibilities lead to a contradiction. This problem challenges the idea of having a universal rule to define all sets, because it shows that such a rule can lead to situations that don't make sense. The paradox has important implications for logic and mathematics. It shows that certain ways of defining sets, especially ones that are too broad or self-referential, can create problems. In response, mathematicians and logicians had to rethink how sets and their definitions work to avoid these kinds of contradictions. Russell's paradox highlights how careful one must be when creating systems of logic or classification, as seemingly simple rules can lead to unexpected issues. The question of whether time is real or an illusion has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. Time feels real because we experience it every day. We see the sun rise and set. We age and we measure events with clocks and calendars. We think of time as something that moves forward, from the past through the present and into the future. But when we look closer, the idea of time starts to feel more complicated. From a scientific perspective, time is often treated as a dimension, much like space. In physics, time is part of the fabric of the universe, especially in theories like relativity. For example, time can appear to move at different rates depending on how fast you are moving or how strong the gravitational pull is around you. This suggests that time is a part of the physical world, but it's not always experienced the same way by everyone or in every situation. On the other hand, some philosophers argue that time may be an illusion. They suggest that what we experience as time could just be our mind's way of organizing events and experiences. The idea is that the past, present, and future don't exist independently in the way we think they do. Instead, time could be a mental construct, a tool our brain uses to make sense of the world. For example, when you think about your childhood, you are recalling memories, but those memories don't exist in the present. They are from the past. Similarly, the future hasn't happened yet, so it doesn't exist either. This view challenges the idea that time is a constant, real thing that flows steadily. This conflict between time being a real force in the universe and time being an illusion of the mind is still debated. While we experience time as moving forward, its true nature remains a mystery. Some see it as a feature of the universe, while others view it as a product of human perception. Negativity bias is the tendency for people to pay more attention to negative experiences or information than to positive ones. This bias can affect how we think and make decisions, often leading us to focus on problems, risks, or threats rather than on the good things around us. For example, if you get 10 compliments in a day but also receive 1 criticism, the criticism may stick with you longer than the compliments. You might dwell on what was said, even though the positive feedback was far greater. This is an example of negativity bias in action, where the negative event outweighs the positive in your mind. This bias is rooted in evolution. Our ancestors needed to be alert to dangers, like predators or natural threats, to survive. Being overly cautious about negative events would have helped them stay safe. In today's world, this instinct still influences how we respond to things. Even as the threats are no longer life or death situations, negativity bias can also show up in everyday situations. For example, if you watch the news, it's often filled with bad stories, crime, disasters, and conflicts. People tend to remember these negative stories more than the positive ones, even though good things happen all the time. This is partly because negative events trigger stronger emotional reactions, which makes them easier to remember. In relationships, negativity bias can make us focus more on the small disagreements or mistakes a person makes, rather than remembering their kindness or the positive things they do. This can affect how we view our friends, family, or coworkers, causing us to see them more negatively than we should. The negativity bias can shape our outlook on life, making us more focused on problems than on solutions or positive experiences. Recognizing this bias can help us shift our focus toward the good, leading to a more balanced perspective. In today's world, we are constantly surrounded by information. Whether it's news, social media, or advertisements, we have access to more details than ever before. Yet, despite all this information, understanding can sometimes be harder to achieve. We can know a lot about something, but still not truly grasp it or be able to use the knowledge effectively. For example, you might read about climate change, watch videos about its effects, and see statistics on rising temperatures. You know the facts, but you might still struggle to understand the full picture. How it will affect your community, how fast it will happen, or what exactly can be done to fix it. The information is there, but it doesn't always lead to a deep understanding of the issue. This is especially true with complex subjects. Take health advice, for example. You might know about different diets, exercise routines, and medical studies. However, without the ability to piece this information together and understand how it applies to you personally, it can feel overwhelming. Having so much data can make it difficult to focus on what's truly important or how to act on it. Another example is in the workplace. Imagine you're given a pile of reports to read. Each report contains valuable data, but when you try to pull everything together, it becomes difficult to see the bigger picture. You end up knowing many small details, but not understanding how they connect or what they mean for your team or company's goals. The issue is not a lack of information, but how we manage and process it. With so much information coming at us, it's easy to become overloaded. The challenge lies in filtering out the noise, focusing on what matters, and turning knowledge into understanding. Without this, we can end up knowing a lot, but being unclear on how to use or apply it. Infinite regress is a concept in philosophy where an explanation or reason is followed by another, and this process continues endlessly without reaching a final, satisfying answer. The problem with infinite regress is that it leaves us stuck, unable to arrive at a clear starting point or conclusion. For example, imagine you ask why something exists. One possible answer might be that it was caused by something else. But then you ask, why did that happen? The answer might be another cause. If you keep asking why, you will find more causes, but never an ultimate explanation. This is an infinite regress, where each answer leads to another question without ever reaching a point where things are fully explained. This idea can be seen in everyday situations as well. If a teacher tells you something and you ask why, and they answer with a reason, you might then ask why that reason is true. If the teacher then gives you another reason, you may continue asking until you run out of explanations. Without a solid starting point, you end up in an endless cycle of questions. In more serious cases, infinite regress can be a problem in areas like logic, theology, and science. For instance, in trying to understand the origin of the universe, people might ask, why is there something rather than nothing? If every answer to this question leads to another question, the process can seem endless and unresolvable. It's like trying to trace the beginning of something, but never reaching an origin. Infinite regress challenges our ability to find solid foundations for understanding complex ideas. Without an end point, it can make it difficult to come to conclusions or build a complete understanding of a subject. This is why philosophers and thinkers try to avoid infinite regress in their explanations and seek final answers or starting points to avoid getting lost in an endless loop. Now is a concept that seems simple, yet it's difficult to define precisely. We experience now as the present moment, the brief instant between the past and the future. It's the moment when things happen, when we act, feel, or think. When you look at a clock, the hands move from one second to the next, and you might think that now is that very instant. But how long does now last? Is it a fraction of a second? A minute? It's hard to say. Consider a conversation. When someone asks, "What is happening right now?" you may point to the ongoing exchange of words. The now is the moment between each sentence, the brief pause as the conversation continues. But as soon as you respond, that now becomes the past and another one begins. In a sense, now is constantly shifting and moving, never staying still long enough to be fully captured. In physics, now is even more complicated. Einstein's theory of relativity suggests that now may not be the same for everyone. If two people are moving at different speeds or are in different places in the universe, their experience of now could be different. What one person sees as happening right now might be slightly different from what someone else sees, depending on where they are and how fast they're moving. In our daily lives, we often think of now as the present moment in which we act or feel, but the idea of now becomes elusive once we try to hold on to it. It's like trying to grab water with your hands. Just as you think you have it, it slips away. Time constantly moves, and as soon as we try to define now, it becomes the past. The now is always in motion, making it one of the most challenging concepts to grasp fully. The planning fallacy is a tendency for people to underestimate how long tasks will take or how difficult they will be. Even when we have experience with similar tasks in the past, we still often make overly optimistic predictions about how quickly we can complete them. For example, imagine you plan to write a report for work. You might think it will only take a few hours to finish, even though in the past, similar reports have taken a whole day. Despite this past experience, you believe this time will be different. You get started and soon realize there are more details to work out than you expected. The hours pass, and the task takes much longer than you initially thought. This is the planning fallacy at play. People are often overly confident when making predictions. They focus on the best-case scenario and ignore potential problems or delays. For instance, when planning a road trip, you might assume traffic will be light and weather will be perfect, leading you to predict a quicker travel time. But if you encounter traffic or bad weather, the trip takes longer than expected, showing how the planning fallacy can affect everyday decisions. This bias is not just about small tasks. It can affect bigger projects too, like building a house or launching a product. Even with experts involved, these projects often take longer and cost more than originally planned. The planners might overlook complications or changes that can arise during the process. The planning fallacy can also be linked to optimism bias, where people expect good outcomes even when past experiences suggest otherwise. It's easy to assume that things will go smoothly, but life is full of unexpected twists. Recognizing the planning fallacy can help us better prepare for the future by being more realistic about time and resources needed for tasks. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that helps people make decisions based on what information is easiest to recall rather than on all the relevant facts. When we rely on this heuristic, we often judge how likely something is to happen based on how quickly examples or memories come to mind. For example, after watching news stories about airplane crashes, you might start to believe that flying is more dangerous than driving. Even though statistics show that flying is much safer, the vividness and frequency of those crash reports make the information more available in your mind, so it affects your judgment. In this case, the availability heuristic leads you to overestimate the risk of flying. Another example is when people assume that shark attacks are common simply because they've seen dramatic footage of such attacks on TV or in movies. Even though shark attacks are rare, the images and stories about them are so memorable that they stick in people's minds, shaping their perceptions of how often they occur. The availability heuristic can also show up in everyday decisions. For instance, if you've recently heard about a local crime, you might feel like the area has become more dangerous, even if the crime rate has not changed much. The recent news makes that information easily accessible in your mind, influencing your view of the situation. This heuristic works because our brains prefer using shortcuts to make decisions quickly. When we can easily recall information, it feels more familiar and trustworthy, even though it might not be the full picture. The availability heuristic helps us make fast judgments, but it can also lead to biased thinking, as we might focus on what's most memorable rather than what's most accurate. Newcomb's paradox is a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of free will, decision-making, and prediction. The scenario involves two boxes, A and B. Box A contains $1,000, and box B either contains $1 million or nothing. You are given the choice to take both boxes or just box B. The catch is that there is a predictor, someone who has a strong track record of correctly predicting your decision. The predictor has already made a guess about whether you will choose one or both boxes. If the predictor believes you will take only box B, they have placed $1 million inside it. If they think you will take both boxes, they have left box B empty. The idea is that the predictor knows your decision with high accuracy, and you have no way of knowing what they predicted. Now, the paradox arises from the conflict between two ways of thinking about the situation. One option is to think purely in terms of maximizing your money. If you take both boxes, you are guaranteed to get $1,000 from box A, plus whatever is in box B, which could be $1 million if the predictor was wrong. By this logic, taking both boxes seems like the best choice. On the other hand, you could trust the predictor's accuracy. If the predictor believes you will choose only box B, then you would end up with $1 million. If you take both boxes, the predictor's guess that you would do so would lead them to leave box B empty, and you would get only $1,000. This presents a puzzle. Should you act in a way that you think will maximize your reward? Or should you trust the predictor and choose only box B? The paradox highlights the tension between rational decision-making and trusting a prediction that is based on strong past accuracy. It leaves us questioning how we should make decisions when predictions about our actions are involved. A paradox of choice is the idea that having too many options can actually make it harder for people to make decisions and lead to less satisfaction. While it seems that more choices should make us happier by offering greater freedom, it often does the opposite. The more options we have, the more difficult it can be to choose, and the more likely we are to feel regret or disappointment after making a decision. For example, imagine going to a grocery store to buy cereal. You might walk down an entire aisle filled with dozens of different brands, flavors, and types. Instead of feeling happy about having so many choices, you might feel overwhelmed. You might spend a long time trying to pick the best one, second-guessing yourself about which choice is truly the best. After you pick one, you may still wonder if you made the right choice, or if another option would have been better. This is a common experience when we have too many choices. It's not just about grocery shopping. This can happen with anything from picking a movie to watch, choosing a job, or even making major life decisions. With more options, we can feel more pressure to make the perfect choice, and the fear of making the wrong decision can be paralyzing. The paradox of choice also connects to the idea of regret. When there are many options to choose from, we are more likely to wonder about the options we didn't choose. This can lead to feelings of dissatisfaction or missed opportunity, even if the choice we made was perfectly fine. For example, after buying a new phone, you might start thinking about the other models you could have chosen, which can make it harder to enjoy the one you picked. In a world with endless choices, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that more options will lead to better decisions. However, often fewer choices lead to more clarity and satisfaction. Chaos theory is the study of systems that appear to be random or unpredictable, but are actually governed by underlying patterns or rules. These systems are sensitive to small changes in initial conditions, meaning that tiny differences can lead to vastly different outcomes over time. This is often referred to as the butterfly effect, where a small event, like the flap of a butterfly's wings, can eventually cause a large, unpredictable change, like a storm halfway around the world. One common example of chaos theory is weather patterns. Weather seems chaotic because it's hard to predict, especially long-term. However, weather is actually influenced by a complex set of factors, and with enough data and the right models, it can be predicted for a short time. But even small changes in one area, like temperature or wind speed, can lead to unexpected results. That's why weather forecasts become less reliable the further into the future they try to predict. Another example is the growth of populations. The number of animals in a certain area might seem unpredictable, but it can follow a pattern influenced by factors like food supply, reproduction rates, and the presence of predators. However, if small changes occur, like a sudden increase in food availability, the population could grow rapidly or suddenly crash. In simple systems, you can often predict what will happen next. But in chaotic systems, the same rules can lead to wildly different results. This makes long-term predictions difficult, even if the system's behavior is based on clear rules. Chaos theory helps us understand that while things may seem random, they are often part of a deeper order that is hard to see at first glance. It shows that small actions can have large, unexpected consequences. And even systems that seem unpredictable may have some hidden structure beneath the surface. The telescoping effect refers to the tendency for people to misremember the timing of events, making them seem more recent than they actually are. This happens because our memory compresses or telescopes the events in time, causing the past to feel closer than it really is. For example, if you think back to a vacation you took a few years ago, you might remember it as though it happened only a few months ago. Your mind shortens the gap between the past and present, making the event feel more recent than it truly is. This effect can be especially noticeable when recalling significant events, like birthdays or anniversaries, which can feel as though they happened more recently than they did. The telescoping effect can also affect how people remember past mistakes or achievements. If someone recalls a mistake they made at work, they might believe it happened just recently, even though it was years ago. Similarly, they might remember an achievement, like a promotion, as happening more recently than it actually did, creating a false sense of closeness to the event. This effect can influence many aspects of life. For example, when filling out surveys or questionnaires, people might be asked to recall certain events or experiences. The telescoping effect can lead to inaccurate answers, as people might place events in the wrong time frame. It can also affect personal reflection, causing people to feel that certain milestones or challenges were more recent or urgent than they truly were. The telescoping effect shows how our memory isn't always accurate. It highlights how we can misinterpret the passage of time, especially when emotions or significant events are involved. Our perception of time can become distorted, making past events feel closer or further away than they really are. The brain in a vat is a thought experiment used in philosophy to question what we can truly know about reality. It suggests that a brain could be removed from a body and kept alive in a jar, with its sensory inputs controlled by a computer. The computer would send signals to the brain, creating the illusion of sight, sound, touch, and other senses. The brain would experience a world that feels real, but in fact, it would be trapped in the jar, with no real connection to the outside world. This idea challenges our understanding of what is real. If the brain in the vat experiences a life that feels just like ours, how can it be sure that it is not living in a fake world? The brain would have no way to tell the difference between the reality it experiences and an illusion created by the computer. This leads to a key question. How can we know that the world we experience is not just a simulation or a trick? Like the brain in the vat, imagine playing a video game where the graphics and interactions feel incredibly real. The game is designed so well that you might forget it's a game and think you're truly part of that world. The brain in a vat scenario asks a similar question. How do we know that the experiences we have are not simply the result of a computer program or some external control? This thought experiment helps raise doubts about our ability to trust our senses or knowledge. It suggests that if we cannot be sure of the true nature of our experiences, we might not be able to fully trust our understanding of reality. In essence, it asks us to reconsider how we know what we know, and whether our perception of the world can ever be entirely reliable. The problem of meaning refers to the challenge of understanding what words, phrases, or concepts really mean. It's about how we communicate ideas and whether the meanings we assign to things are clear and shared. Language is not just a tool for conveying facts, but also for expressing thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. However, the meaning behind a word can often be unclear, depending on context or personal interpretation. For example, consider the word justice. It might mean fairness to one person, but punishment to another. Even though both people understand the word, their interpretations of it are different. This is one of the central issues in the problem of meaning. How can we be sure that when we use words, they mean the same thing to others as they do to us? Another example is the word dog. A child might think of a dog as a playful, friendly animal, while an adult might think of it as a loyal pet or a working animal. The meaning of dog can shift depending on who is using the word and their experiences with dogs. The problem of meaning also appears when we try to explain abstract concepts like love or freedom. These are ideas that can have many different meanings depending on who you ask. One person may think of love as an intense feeling, while another might view it as a choice or a commitment. These varying interpretations can lead to confusion when trying to have meaningful discussions or arguments about such topics. This issue is not limited to individual words, but extends to entire languages and cultures. A word in one language might not have an exact match in another, making it hard to translate or understand its full meaning. The problem of meaning highlights how language can be both a powerful tool and a source of misunderstanding, as people may interpret the same word or idea in many different ways. A hard problem of consciousness is a question that has puzzled scientists and philosophers for a long time. It asks why and how we have subjective experiences, what it feels like to be aware, to see colors, to feel emotions, or to think. While we can understand how the brain processes information and controls actions, the hard problem goes deeper. It seeks to explain why we have personal, inner experiences at all. For example, when you look at a red apple, your brain processes the visual information and sends signals to help you recognize it. But the hard problem asks, why does this process feel like something? Why does looking at the apple create the experience of red in your mind? We know how the brain works in terms of neurons and signals, but this doesn't explain why we experience anything at all. This problem becomes clearer when comparing it to simpler tasks. Imagine a robot that can pick up an apple and identify its color, but the robot doesn't feel anything about the apple. It processes the information, but there's no inner experience. In humans, however, the experience of seeing the apple is tied to emotions, memories, and perceptions, things that are hard to explain just through brain activity. The hard problem contrasts with what is called the easy problems of consciousness, which deal with understanding how the brain controls things like movement, memory, or attention. These are easier to study because we can measure and observe the brain's activity. The hard problem, on the other hand, asks why the brain's activity leads to consciousness, and why that activity gives rise to the feeling of being aware. Despite advances in neuroscience, the hard problem remains unsolved. We can study the brain's functions, but we still don't fully understand why those functions lead to the rich, personal experiences we call consciousness. Overchoice refers to the problem that arises when people are given too many options, making it harder for them to make a decision. Instead of feeling empowered by the number of choices, people often feel overwhelmed or confused. The more choices there are, the harder it becomes to pick the right one, leading to indecision or dissatisfaction. For example, imagine you go to a coffee shop with 50 different types of coffee. While the variety might seem exciting at first, it could quickly become overwhelming. You might spend so much time looking at the menu that you end up feeling unsure about which drink to order. Even if you make a choice, you might wonder if you picked the best option, leaving you less satisfied with your decision. Overchoice can happen in many situations. Shopping online, for instance, offers a wide range of products, but having too many choices can make it hard to settle on the best one. When faced with an endless number of shirts, shoes, or gadgets, the decision-making process can drag on, and you might even abandon the shopping altogether out of frustration. The effect of overchoice is not limited to buying products. It can also affect more personal decisions, like choosing a career path or a place to live. With so many options, people might find it difficult to commit to one choice, worried they'll make the wrong decision. This often leads to regret or second-guessing once a decision is made. Overchoice can also affect people's happiness. Research shows that when we have too many options, we are more likely to feel dissatisfied with the outcome, even if the decision turns out to be good. The more choices we have, the more likely we are to focus on what we didn't choose, rather than enjoying the choice we made. This constant worry can decrease our overall satisfaction and well-being. The idea of short-term memory limits, often referred to as the 7 ± 2 rule, suggests that people can only hold about 7 pieces of information in their short-term memory at one time, give or take a couple. This means that if you try to remember more than 7 things at once, you might struggle to keep track of all of them. For example, if someone asks you to remember a phone number like 555-1234, that's a short string of numbers that most people can easily recall. But if they give you 15 digits to remember, it becomes much harder. The information starts to overlap, and you're more likely to forget parts of the number. This limitation can also be seen when people try to juggle multiple tasks or pieces of information at once. If you're trying to remember a list of items at the grocery store, you might only be able to remember 7 items without writing them down. If you try to remember more, you might forget some and need to check the list repeatedly. The 7 ± 2 rule is often used to explain why we struggle with certain kinds of memory tasks. When the information is too complex or exceeds our memory limits, it becomes harder to process or store in short-term memory. This is why people often use techniques like chunking to help manage more information. For example, breaking a long string of numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 into smaller chunks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9 can make it easier to remember. While this rule is a general guideline, the actual limit can vary from person to person. Some might handle a bit more than 7 items, while others may manage fewer. Nonetheless, the 7 ± 2 concept highlights an important truth. Our short-term memory is not limitless, and understanding its limits can help us find better ways to manage and retain information. Complex cause-effect loops refer to situations where multiple causes interact with each other, creating a cycle that is difficult to understand or predict. In these loops, one event leads to another, which then influences the first event, often in ways that continue to repeat or grow over time. For example, imagine a person who feels stressed. The stress might cause them to lose sleep, which in turn makes them more stressed the next day because they are tired. The lack of sleep and the increase in stress feed into each other, creating a loop where one issue keeps making the other worse. In this case, stress and sleep loss are linked in a cycle that can be hard to break, and the effects keep influencing each other. A more complex example can be seen in the economy. If a country's economy starts to slow down, businesses may make fewer sales, leading to job cuts. As more people lose their jobs, they spend less money, which further slows down the economy. This creates a negative feedback loop, where the initial slowdown leads to more job loss, which then causes the economy to slow even further. In other cases, these loops can be positive. For instance, if a person exercises regularly, it can improve their mood, which makes them want to exercise more. The better mood leads to more motivation, creating a loop that strengthens their desire to keep exercising. In this way, the cycle is beneficial, with each action leading to positive effects that encourage more of the same behavior. These cause-effect loops show how causes and effects can be connected in ways that are not straightforward. Small changes or events can grow into much bigger effects, often in unpredictable ways. Understanding these loops can be helpful in solving problems because it shows that sometimes the best way to change the outcome is to identify and interrupt the cycle. Non-Euclidean geometry is a type of geometry that challenges the rules of traditional Euclidean geometry. In Euclidean geometry, the basic principles we learn in school, like the idea that parallel lines never meet, are considered true. But in non-Euclidean geometry, these principles do not hold. This type of geometry explores how shapes and spaces behave when the normal rules are altered. A key example of non-Euclidean geometry is found in the study of curved surfaces. Imagine the surface of a sphere, like the Earth. On a flat surface, two parallel lines will always stay the same distance apart. But on a sphere, parallel lines can actually meet. For example, lines of longitude on the Earth's surface, though they seem parallel, eventually meet at the poles. This is an example of how non-Euclidean geometry applies to curved spaces. Another example comes from the theory of space in the universe. In Einstein's theory of general relativity, gravity is explained as the bending of space and time around massive objects like stars or planets. This bending is an example of non-Euclidean geometry because the normal rules of flat space no longer apply. The space around a massive object is curved, which affects how objects move and how we perceive distances. Non-Euclidean geometry isn't just a theoretical idea, it has real-world applications. For example, in the design of certain types of engineering structures, such as domes or bridges, understanding curved spaces can lead to more efficient designs. It also plays a role in computer graphics, helping to model and create three-dimensional images that mimic real-world curves and shapes. This branch of mathematics shows that the rules we use to describe flat, everyday spaces may not apply when dealing with curved or unusual spaces. Non-Euclidean geometry opens up new ways to understand the world and the universe, stretching the limits of what we think we know about space and shape. Cognitive dissonance is the feeling of discomfort that happens when a person holds two conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or values at the same time. This discomfort often leads people to change one of their beliefs or behaviors in order to reduce the tension and make things feel more consistent. For example, imagine a person who values healthy living but smokes cigarettes. The belief in staying healthy conflicts with the act of smoking, creating a sense of discomfort. To reduce this discomfort, the person might either quit smoking or change their belief about health. They might tell themselves that smoking isn't as harmful as it's made out to be, or that it's too difficult to quit. This way, they reduce the conflict between their actions and their beliefs. Another example is when people buy a product that they later regret. After making the purchase, they may experience dissonance because the product doesn't meet their expectations. To deal with this feeling, they might convince themselves that the product is actually better than they thought, or that it was the best option available. They might even justify the purchase by focusing on the positive aspects of the item, downplaying its flaws, or comparing it to more expensive alternatives. Cognitive dissonance can also show up in group behavior. For instance, if someone is part of a group that holds certain beliefs or opinions, but they privately disagree with some of them, they may feel discomfort. To ease this tension, they may change their views to align with the group, even if they don't fully agree, just to avoid the discomfort of holding opposing views. This theory explains how people often try to justify their actions, beliefs, or decisions to make their experiences feel more consistent. It shows how people tend to resolve inner conflict by changing their thoughts or behaviors to reduce the discomfort caused by holding contradictory beliefs. Existence is the state of being, or the fact that something is real and has presence in the world. It's a broad and deep concept that covers everything that can be perceived, experienced, or thought about. It asks the question, what does it mean for something to be? For example, when you look at a chair, you experience its existence because you can see it, touch it, and interact with it. The chair is present in the world, and it has a certain function which we recognize. But existence also applies to things we can't see or touch, like ideas, emotions, or concepts. A thought about love or a memory of a past event also exist, but not in the same way as physical objects. In philosophy, existence is often discussed in terms of the mind and reality. Philosophers ask whether the world outside of our minds exists independently of our perception, or whether our minds create the world we see. For example, when you imagine a tree in a forest, does the tree exist only in your mind, or does it exist independently of your thoughts? These questions challenge the way we think about the nature of reality and our place within it. Existence also brings up the question of why anything exists at all. If you think about the universe, why is there something rather than nothing? Why do stars, planets, and life exist instead of just empty space? This is a fundamental question in philosophy and science, exploring the origin and meaning of everything that exists. In everyday life, we often take existence for granted. But thinking deeply about existence forces us to consider what it truly means for something to be real, how we perceive it, and how we relate to it. Illusory correlation is a tendency for people to see a relationship between two things when, in reality, no such relationship exists, or the connection is weaker than it seems. This happens when we connect events or behaviors that aren't really linked, often because we remember the instances when both things happened together and forget the times when they didn't. For example, if you believe that it always rains when you wash your car, you might pay attention to the times when it rains right after you wash it. Because of this, you might think there is a strong link between washing your car and rain. However, in reality, rain is not caused by washing your car. You simply remember the instances when both events occurred together and overlook all the other times when it didn't rain. Another common example is in the realm of stereotypes. If someone notices that a particular group of people behaves in a certain way in one or two situations, they may start to believe that this behavior is typical for the entire group. For instance, if a person sees a few athletes from a particular country winning many competitions, they might mistakenly think that all athletes from that country are exceptional, even though the success of a few doesn't mean it applies to everyone. Illusory correlation can also appear in everyday life. Imagine you wear a lucky shirt before a job interview and then get the job. You might start to believe that wearing that shirt helps you get hired, even though there's no real connection between your shirt and the outcome of the interview. You are simply creating a false link because the events happen together. This type of thinking can lead to misjudgments and incorrect beliefs. By recognizing when we're seeing illusory correlations, we can avoid making decisions based on inaccurate or unfounded connections. Survivorship bias is a type of error in thinking that happens when we focus only on the people or things that have survived or succeeded, while ignoring those that didn't. This can lead to faulty conclusions, as we overlook the failures that might offer important lessons. For example, consider a study of successful entrepreneurs. If we look only at the billionaires who built their businesses from scratch, we might assume that success comes from hard work, clever ideas, or specific strategies. However, this ignores all the entrepreneurs who worked just as hard, had similar ideas, but failed. By focusing only on the successful ones, we might miss out on valuable insights about what went wrong for the ones who didn't succeed. This bias is often seen in areas like investing. If you only read stories about investors who made huge profits, you might believe that their strategies always lead to success. But those investors who lost money or failed to make similar profits are not included in the story. By focusing only on the winners, we end up with a distorted view of what works and why. Another example can be found in military history. During World War II, researchers studied damaged airplanes to figure out how to make them more resilient. They looked at where the most bullet holes were found and suggested reinforcing those parts. However, they missed a crucial point. Planes that were hit in those spots didn't make it back. The survivors showed where the damage was less deadly, not where the plane could survive the hits. By focusing only on the planes that returned, the researchers almost missed the real issue. Survivorship bias can lead us to believe that certain paths to success are foolproof, when in reality, we don't know about the failures that didn't make it. Recognizing this bias helps us make better, more informed decisions by considering both successes and failures. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias where people with little knowledge or skill in a particular area overestimate their abilities. It happens because they lack the experience or understanding to recognize how much more there is to learn. In other words, they don't know enough to know how much they don't know. For example, imagine someone who has just learned the basics of playing the guitar. They might think they are quite good at it because they can play a few simple chords. However, because they don't have much experience, they might not realize how much more there is to learn, such as more complex techniques, advanced theory, or the skill required to play at a professional level. Their limited knowledge leads them to overestimate their ability. This effect can also show up in the workplace. A new employee with a basic understanding of their job might feel confident in their abilities and even think they know better than more experienced coworkers. However, as they gain more experience, they may realize that their initial confidence was misplaced. Over time, their understanding deepens, and they recognize how much more there is to learn, leading to a more accurate assessment of their skills. The Dunning-Kruger effect is often seen in many areas of life, from people trying to fix their cars with little mechanical knowledge to individuals giving advice on topics they don't fully understand. Because they have just enough knowledge to understand basic concepts, they may think they are experts, but their limited experience means they miss important details or make mistakes. This bias can be problematic because it can lead people to make decisions or judgments based on inaccurate self-assessments. Recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect helps people approach their abilities with more humility and encourages them to seek out more information or feedback before making conclusions.